Chapter 104. Chenga stared at the shuttle of flying Apsara in her hand. It was similar to the shuttles used to weave cloth in the secular world, but it was a bit bigger. It was thick and round in the middle and pointed at both ends. She didn't know where it was made from, but it shone with a golden light and was impervious to heat and cold. A rustling sound came from the forest, and a first-rank spiritual beast appeared in front of her in a daze. Chenga smiled. This little thing really came at the right time. She raised her hand, and the shuttle of flying Apsara turned into a golden light that soared into the sky. The small spirit beast that resembled a squirrel raised its head and stared at the flashing golden light with its beady black eyes. To its surprise, it discovered that the streak of golden light had transformed into hundreds of tiny golden streaks that were arranged in a circular formation around it. The little spiritual beast seemed to have just realized the danger. It shrank its head, swung its tail, and turned around, wanting to jump away. However, the countless golden rays had already sealed off all of its escape routes. No matter how it tried to jump, it couldn't escape. The little guy was anxious. It bared its teeth and clapped its hands. A scorching hot spiritual energy rushed out and actually caused the golden rays to tremble. Chenga was stunned. She pressed her hand down, and the golden lights scattered and gathered again, pressing down on the little fellow. No matter how the little fellow struggled, it couldn't jump out. When it finally felt a bit tired, Chenga shook her hand and tied it up with a rope. She withdrew the shuttle of flying Apsara, walked forward, and picked up the little spiritual beast. The little spiritual beast bared its teeth at her and struggled angrily. Chenga didn't care at all. She rummaged through her Chinkuan bag, took out a spiritual beast bag and put it inside. Once she was done, she released her flying sword and flew back to her cave on Clear Spring Peak. Originally, she just wanted to test the power of the shuttle of flying Apsara, but she unexpectedly caught an interesting little thing. This little thing obviously knew a very advanced fire element spell. Although its power wasn't great, it wasn't ordinary fire. Chenga landed outside her cave and happened to see Luo Fengxue coming back. She called out, "Senior Martial Sister Luo?" Luo Fengxue wiped her face and came over. "Chenga, did you go out?" Chenga nodded, opened her cave and let Luo Fengxue in. Luo Fengxue, who looked exhausted, walked into her cave and sat motionlessly on a stone chair. Chenga carefully looked at her expression and asked, "Senior Martial Sister Luo, what's wrong?" With great difficulty, Luo Fengxue lifted her spirits and sighed. "I've been busy for more than 10 days. I haven't rested." Chenga was surprised. Chenga knew Luo Fengxue wasn't an ascetic cultivator. Instead, she was passionate about management. After she built her foundation, she was promoted to steward of the steward's hall. But she knew that deacons didn't have to be busy every single day, and all the minor matters were handled by deacons and disciples, and she only had to oversee the deacon's hall on normal days. So what could possibly make her so busy? Senior Martial Sister Luo, did something big happen in the sect? Luo Fengxue rubbed her brows and said weakly, "Do you still remember when eldest Martial Sister took several senior Martial brothers and sisters out of the sect a month ago?" Fengxue said. It was something that happened when she went to see Martial Uncle Shenin after she built her foundation. At that time, Martial Uncle Shenin asked her eldest Martial Sister, Han Qingyu, to take her 3 senior Martial brothers and sisters with her. After her she said went and she and went. A few months ago there seemed to be some movement in the southern forest. Eldest senior sister and the others went to investigate, but after they left, there was no news of them. What? Chenga was astonished. Luo Fengxue nodded. Eldest Martial Sister and the others aren't the only ones who went missing. This time, other disciples sent by Martial Uncles and Martial Uncles from other peaks also disappeared without a trace. Even though Chenga wasn't involved in the matters of the school, she knew how important this matter was. The 17 foundation building cultivators were all elite disciples. If all of them died, it would be a big loss even for a large cultivation group like Shenqing School. Although there were more than 500 foundation establishment cultivators in the sect, they were the cream of the crop. They were the ones with the highest possibility of reaching core formation. Over the past dozen or so days, we've contacted the other sects, and we discovered that the other 6 great system-allocated sects are also in the same situation. Only then did everyone realize that this matter is not as simple as it seems. Luo Fengxue rubbed her reddened eyes then said to Chenga, "Chenga, you don't have to worry. This matter will be handled by the sect's elders so it won't affect us. Alright, I'll go take a rest first. That's all for now." "Rest well, Senior Martial Sister." Luo Fengxue waved her hand and returned to her immortal's cave while rubbing her eyes. Mo Qiange didn't think too much about it. Just like Luo Fengxue said, this kind of matter didn't need them foundation-building disciples to worry about. The elders would handle it. She opened the spiritual beast bag and released the little spiritual beast. Once the little thing came out of the spiritual beast bag, it blinked its black eyes and stared at her as if it was begging. Mo Qiange then pulled the rope that was tied to its body away. Once the little thing regained its freedom, it immediately turned around and ran towards the entrance of the cave. Mo Qiange raised her hand, and the shuttle of flying Apsara was launched once again. A golden light enveloped it completely. Woo-woo. The little thing knew how powerful the shuttle of flying Apsara was, so it immediately turned around and begged for mercy. Mo Qiange retrieved the shuttle of flying Apsara and said, "If you don't run, I won't tie you up." The little thing seemed to understand her words. It sat with its hind legs together and put its two front legs together, making a begging gesture. Mo Qiange couldn't help but find it funny. She opened her hand and retrieved the shuttle of flying Apsara. The little thing stared at the stone door reluctantly, but in the end, it still slowly slipped back. Spiritual beasts were quite sensitive to dangerous things, and this little thing could naturally feel it. Mo Qiange's strength was far superior to it, so it couldn't run away and could only submit. Seeing that the little thing was obedient, Mo Qiange waved her hand. It had glossy brown fur, shiny black eyes and a very large tail. It looked a bit like a squirrel, but Mo Qiange recognized it. It was a small spiritual beast called the Inferno Beast. This kind of spiritual beast generally couldn't cultivate to a very high level, but it was born with fire techniques. Its fire wasn't ordinary fire, but ardent yang real fire. It was a kind of innate real fire that was even purer than the Dantian real fire of foundation-building cultivators. It was excellent for concocting medicinal pills and refining tools. Mo Qiange picked the little thing up, stroked its fur and said, "Be good and I'll help you cultivate. If I form my gold core one day I'll let you go." The little thing's eyes brightened as it stared at her. "Looks like you agree." Mo Qiange smiled and put it on the ground. She took out a few aura-nourishing pills she no longer had any use for it and gave them to it. "I'll give you a name. Since you're an Inferno Beast I'll call you Xiaohua." The little thing swallowed the aura-nourishing pills in one gulp, then raised its head and let out two woo-woo sounds as if it was protesting her completely uncreative name. Mo Qiange smiled, completely unmoved. "I didn't ask whether you agree or not. In any case you'll be called Xiaohua. Come here, you'll live here from now on. You can play in the small valley behind, but you're not allowed to make trouble. If you're not obedient, I'll put you in the spiritual beast bag." The little thing let out two woo-woo sounds again. Mo Qiange patted it and gave it a few more aura-nourishing pills. She put it in the spiritual beast room and returned to the cultivation room to meditate. Only after entering the foundation-building realm did she realize how useless her spiritual roots were. When she was in the aura-refining realm, she ate medicinal pills in the spirit-gathering formation, so her cultivation didn't grow any slower than elite disciples. But now that she was in the foundation-building realm, even if she took medicinal pills, her progress wouldn't be as obvious as when she was in the aura-refining realm. This month, she couldn't cultivate properly, so the growth of her spiritual aura was minimal, so she had to stop. If she continued to cultivate at this speed, even if she used up the remaining 300 years of her lifespan, she still wouldn't be able to form her gold core. Therefore, when she saw this Inferno Beast, she was tempted. As it turned out, she concocted medicinal pills only for the sake of constitution-enhancing pills. Now that the pill recipe for constitution-enhancing pills had been given to Grandmaster Jinghe and Martial Uncle Shoujing sent her a bottle of constitution-enhancing pills every once in a while, she originally planned to give up on concocting medicinal pills. But now that she realized her aptitude was so useless, she had no choice but to pick up her pill-concocting skills. Mo Qiange sighed, then closed her eyes and began to cultivate. She already tested the power of the shuttle of flying Apsara. Martial Uncle Shenin said this thing could transform and contain an illusory formation. Indeed, this thing could attack and defend. It was indeed a first-class magic tool. In addition, Martial Uncle Shenin repeatedly warned her about the soul-refining art, telling her to cultivate it slowly and not to rush it. Although cultivating the soul-refining art was very risky, it was indeed very powerful. The soul-refining art was a cultivation technique that specialized in cultivating primordial spirits. It could directly launch attacks against primordial spirits, which had always been the weakest part of cultivators. If she succeeded in cultivating it, the power of this cultivation technique would be extraordinary. Primordial spirits were, in fact, what mortals referred to as souls. Humans were born with souls, but cultivators cultivated their bodies and souls, eventually forming their primordial spirits. Divine sense was derived from primordial spirits. Under normal circumstances, primordial spirits were hidden deep in the sea of knowledge in the Dantian, so divine sense couldn't attack them. On the contrary, it was easy to be injured. Ordinary cultivation techniques also strengthened divine sense, but they only made divine sense more sensitive and covered a wider area. This soul-refining art, on the other hand, cultivated primordial spirits so that divine sense would have the power to attack. Mo Chenga didn't dare to say there weren't other cultivation techniques that cultivated primordial spirits, but she was certain that very few people cultivated them. The reason was very simple. It was precisely because of the risk of suffering from chi deviation, as Martial Uncle Shenin said. Every cultivator knew how fragile primordial spirits were. When cultivating primordial spirits, if one didn't grasp the right amount, it was very likely that one's primordial spirit would be damaged, resulting in serious injuries. If it was a nascent soul cultivator, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, nascent soul cultivators had fused their primordial spirit and gold core into one, forming their nascent soul, so their primordial spirits wouldn't be that fragile. However, for cultivators below the core formation realm, if their primordial spirits were damaged, their cultivation levels would greatly regress. Because of this, Martial Uncle Shenin didn't give her this cultivation technique from the very beginning. Later on, he even repeatedly warned her not to be greedy. However, other people were other people. Mo Chenga, who cultivated this soul-refining art, had a few advantages compared to others. Her pure Yin constitution and originally extremely poor aptitude. Pure Yin constitution meant that Yin and Yang wouldn't clash, and spiritual roots of the origin could balance each other out. The so-called chi deviation occurred when one cultivated a cultivation technique that destroyed the balance inside their body. Mo Chenga had a pure Yin constitution, so she wouldn't have any Yin and Yang imbalance. Furthermore, she also had spiritual roots of the origin, so there was a small circulation inside her body. Because of that, she could be said to be blessed by nature when she practiced this technique. As long as she wasn't greedy and was cautious, the possibility of her chi deviation was very small. However, cultivating this technique was really not easy. Cultivating primordial spirits naturally had to start with the primordial spirit, but primordial spirits were extremely fragile, so they could only be strengthened slowly. Mo Chenga had been cultivating for about a month, but she still hadn't made any progress. Her cultivation level hadn't advanced, and she didn't have a clue about the cultivation technique either. Mo Chenga realized that after entering the foundation building realm, her future was very bleak. Chapter 105. The Inferno Beast was a kind of spiritual beast that was easy to raise. It didn't need special food or a good environment, it could be raised casually. This kind of small spiritual beast wasn't rare in Kunwu. Low-level cultivators liked to catch one or two to concoct medicinal pills or refine tools, so Mo Chenga wasn't worried about how to raise it. After catching the little Inferno Beast, Mo Chenga raised it in the spiritual beast room and in the small valley behind her cave. In any case, there weren't many things in her cave, and the medicinal fields in the valley were also covered with restrictions. At most, the little fellow could only gnaw on the turf and wouldn't cause much trouble. When it was hungry, she fed it with aura pills. When it was thirsty, there was a spring in the valley. Moreover, without any natural enemies, the little fellow grew round very quickly. After a month, she had some clues about the soul-refining art, and the Inferno Beast no longer had any resistance towards her, so Mo Chenga started to concoct medicinal pills. The basic medicinal pills for foundation-building cultivators were soul-strengthening pills. She had already concocted constitution-enhancing pills, so it wasn't difficult. However, the spiritual plants needed weren't as cheap as the medicinal pills for aura-refining cultivators. After spending several thousand spirit stones, she only bought 100 sets of raw materials. Fortunately, she now had the allowance of an elite disciple. In addition to her original several thousand spirit stones, she could afford it. After catching the Inferno Beast and bringing it to the concocting room, Mo Chenga closed her door and immersed herself in studying pill concocting. Several months passed in a hurry. One day she suddenly heard the ringing of a bell outside. Only then did she realize that a long time had passed. Mo Chenga stopped concocting and walked out of her cave. She happened to run into Wei Jiasi, who was walking out with a worried expression. Mo Chenga stepped forward to greet her. "Senior Martial Sister Wei, what happened?" Wei Jiasi shook her head and answered faintly, "I just heard the bell, so I naturally didn't know. This bell is used to summon disciples. Disciples from every peak have to go to the main peak when they hear it. You'll know when you get there." Wei Jiaxi no longer looked at Mo Chenga and flew towards the main peak on her flying magic tool. Mo Chenga looked around. Han Qingyu hadn't returned since she disappeared, and Luo Fengshue's cave was also quiet. She was probably in the steward's hall. Mo Chenga didn't know anyone else, so she also flew towards the main peak on her flying sword. At this very moment all the disciples on the mountain were busy, but they weren't in a mess. Disciples in the foundation building realm and above were riding their flying magic tools, while aura refining disciples were riding the 10,000 miles cloud shared by each peak, rushing towards the main peak. As Mo Chenga watched, she couldn't help but sigh inwardly. This was the demeanor of a famous and big cultivation group. These disciples suddenly encountered a problem, but they didn't panic at all. Several thousand disciples acted in an orderly manner. Presumably, even if something happened, they wouldn't be the slightest bit flustered when dealing with it. Once she arrived at the main peak, she looked down and saw that the square was already full of people. Several dozen core formation cultivators and 2 nascent soul grandmasters were standing at the entrance of the main hall of the 3 pure ones with solemn expressions on their faces. Mo Chenga quickly found the place where the foundation building disciples were standing. She landed her flying sword and stood there solemnly. There were more than 10 core formation cultivators and 2 nascent soul grandmasters. She didn't believe that nothing serious had happened. Could it be related to Senior Sister Han's disappearance? Although Mo Chenga had been concocting medicinal pills in seclusion for several months, she knew there was no news of Senior Sister Han after she disappeared. Several martial uncles left the mountain to look for her, but they didn't find any clues. She occasionally went to see martial uncle Shenin, but he always looked worried. The square was gradually filled with people. When all the disciples returned to their positions, an old nascent soul Taoist who was leading the group glanced at them. A core formation cultivator stepped forward and shouted, "Disciples, be quiet." His voice wasn't very loud, but it could be heard clearly in every corner. The disciples who were originally whispering to each other immediately stopped talking. The core formation cultivator's expression was solemn. He said in a deep voice, "I summoned all the disciples here because I have something to tell you. Several months ago, there were abnormal movements of demonic beasts in the southern forest. We sent elite disciples to investigate, but unexpectedly, all of them went missing. To avoid chaos, this matter has never been announced. In the past few months, we've received news that a lot of disciples outside have gone missing, so we summoned everyone to seal the mountain." Once he said this, the square went into an uproar. Although many disciples hadn't experienced the mountain sealing order, they had heard of it. The so-called mountain sealing order was to activate the Great Mountain Protecting Formation, close the mountain gate and no longer receive visitors. Disciples were also only allowed to enter but not leave. Apart from those who received the order, they were cut off from the outside world. Mo Chenga had been concocting medicinal pills in seclusion for several months, so Luo Fengxue rarely saw her. She actually didn't know the impact of her disappearance was so widespread. Since it could make one of the top cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole close their doors, it was clear how serious this matter was. At that moment, the old nascent soul Taoist standing in the middle raised his hand, and the core formation cultivator from before stepped back. Mo Chenga once heard from Luo Fengxue that this nascent soul grandmaster was the head grand supreme elder of Shenqing School, which meant he was the #1 figure in Shenqing School. Reportedly, his cultivation level was in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, and his strength was also one of the best in the Celestial Pole. The head Grand Supreme Elder, whose eyes had been half closed, suddenly opened them. His sharp gaze swept over the disciples in the square. After a while, he raised his voice and said, "Disciples, do you think Shenqing School is about to encounter a formidable enemy because of the mountain sealing order?" The square was silent, but judging from everyone's expressions, this nascent soul grandmaster was obviously right. Since the school was founded, the mountain sealing order only happened once every several hundred years, and every time it happened, it was a great disaster. The old Taoist once again closed his eyes and said in a leisurely tone, "Let me tell you, it's not only Shenqing School, but all of Kunwu is currently facing another demonic beast riot. Furthermore, according to the disciples' reports, this time's demonic beast riot is extraordinary. Shenqing School can be said to be strong now, but we must understand the principle that, the more prosperous it is, the easier it will fall. Being too strong will always attract disasters. For the sake of Shenqing School's disciples, the Grand Supreme Elder has decided to seal the mountain until the demonic beast riot is over. During this period, Shenqing School's disciples must obey orders and can't leave the mountain without permission." Once the head Grand Supreme Elder finished speaking, Mo Chenga glanced at the foundation building cultivators around her and found many of them were frowning. Some were worried, some were excited, and some were afraid. She had heard about the demonic beast riot in the past. Most of the cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole were built on Kunwu Mountain Range, and to the south of Kunwu Mountain Range was a boundless forest. This forest and Kunwu Mountain Range combined to form the largest spiritual land in the Celestial Pole. There were many cultivators living on the mountain, and there were many demonic spirits growing in the forest. If the cultivation level of demonic spirits was high, their intelligence would gradually be similar to that of humans. Under normal circumstances they wouldn't go out of the forest, but every once in a while the big demonic beasts inside would order low-level demonic beasts to attack the mountains and obtain some medicinal pills, spirit tools, and the like from human cultivators to help them cultivate. Every time there was a conflict between humans and demonic beasts, it was both a calamity and an opportunity. Demonic beasts wanted to snatch medicinal pills, while humans also wanted to kill demonic beasts to obtain their beast cores or corpses. There was no justice or evil, they were just competing for what they wanted. Mo Chenga pondered for a moment and immediately understood what her fellow foundation building disciples were thinking. They were excited because this was a good opportunity. If they made a great contribution or obtained some fated chances in this matter, their cultivation levels would advance very quickly. What they were afraid of was that some people would definitely leave the mountain to carry out a mission. Foundation building disciples like them were the backbone of the mountain's strength. If there was an accident, they wouldn't even have their corpses left. Mo Chenga wasn't worried at all. In any case, she was Grandmaster Jinghe's registered disciple, so he definitely wouldn't send her to die for something too dangerous. Besides, she wasn't afraid. During the 7 years she wandered around with second uncle, she went everywhere and encountered danger countless times, so she didn't think there was anything to be afraid of. Alright, aura refining disciples, go back to your immortals' caves and cultivate with peace of mind. Foundation building disciples, stay. Upon hearing that, the aura refining disciples left one after another. They looked at the foundation building disciples with sympathetic and envious expressions. Once all the aura refining disciples had left, the core formation cultivator from before stepped forward. Martial nephews, many of you experienced the demonic beast riot 50 years ago, so I presume I don't need to explain it in detail. The demonic beast riot isn't something that can be resolved by sealing off the mountain. We still need to go and eliminate the enemies. Aura refining disciples haven't entered the school of immortality yet, so you foundation building disciples are the cornerstones of Shenqing School. You still need to work hard on this matter. We'll send 6 core formation cultivators and more than 100 foundation building disciples. You can go and prepare yourselves, then wait for further notice. Once he finished speaking, the core formation cultivator signaled everyone to leave. Mo Chenga was full of questions. While following the crowd back to Clear Spring Peak, she was also puzzled. Shouldn't they announce the list of disciples participating in the demon exterminating battle? Why did it end so easily? Chenga. Just as she landed on Clear Spring Peak, she heard a voice coming from behind her. She turned around and saw that it was Yi Jingwen. Big brother Yi. She looked at Yi Jingwen and saw that his expression was similar to Luo Fengshue's. He looked exhausted, as if he had been busy all this time. That's not right. Yi Jingwen is the same as me. He doesn't have a job, so how could he be this tired? Yi Jingwen waved his hand, rolled up his sleeves and walked towards the house. Let's talk inside. Mo Chenga promptly opened the door to her immortal's cave and invited him inside. Once they entered, Yi Jingwen said, Chenga, in a few days I'll be leaving the mountain to carry out a mission. Mo Chenga was shocked. Yi Jingwen was already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm at such a young age and was one of the best among the elite disciples. Logically speaking, he shouldn't be sent out before the situation was clear. Big brother Yi, why were you chosen? Yi Jingwen smiled bitterly and said, It can't be helped. My master was chosen, so I can only go with him. Could it be that the people who will go have already been decided? Yi Jingwen nodded. Before this matter was announced, the martial uncles already knew about it and already decided who would leave the mountain to exterminate the demons. Each of the 6 peaks will send a core formation senior, and our Clear Spring Peak will be sent by my master, Master Daoist Qingyuan. Oh. In that case, with the master there shouldn't be any danger. As for the foundation building disciples, only a few of them are elite disciples, and most of them are ordinary disciples. You don't have to worry, they probably won't choose you. However, this matter also depends on the situation of the battle. If the situation isn't good, everyone might have to go, but if it's too good, They might send disciples like you who have just built your foundation to gain experience. I'm just here to tell you, so you have to be prepared. And I understand. Seeing that she agreed, Yi Jingwen stood up without even taking a sip of tea. Alright, I'll take my leave first. Big brother Yi, you have to be careful. Yi Jingwen looked back with a smile, then hurriedly left. Mo Chenga turned around and went back to her immortal's cave, her mind full of thoughts. She wasn't afraid of what Yi Jingwen said. When they left the mountain to exterminate demons, they would be led by core formation cultivators, so the danger wouldn't be too high. However, she had just advanced to the foundation building realm and couldn't use the soul refining art yet, so her methods were a bit lacking. If she really participated in the battle, she wasn't confident. Forget it, she'd better make some preparations. If it really was her turn, she wouldn't be flustered. She had to prepare some life-saving measures. Chapter 106. After feeding the little inferno beast an aura-nourishing pill, Mo Chenga looked up and saw several flight lights streaking across the sky. She pondered for a moment, then left the little inferno beast in the small valley and left the immortal's cave by herself. After the mountain was sealed, the entire Great Mountain Barrier formation of Mount Taikong was activated, leaving only 1 or 2 entrances. Those disciples who were ordered to exterminate the demons would enter and leave from those entrances. However, other than the 100 or so disciples who were ordered to leave the mountain at the beginning, there were very few people coming in and out. This light must be a message. She hadn't received any news for so many days, so when she thought of Yi Jingwen, she pondered for a while, then went to the steward's hall. Before she entered the steward's hall, the 2 aura-refining disciples guarding the door greeted her. Martial Uncle Mo Chenga chuckled. Now that she was in the foundation-building realm, she was also a martial uncle in other people's eyes. She glanced at the steward's hall and asked, "Is there any news about the demonic beast riot?" One of the aura-refining disciples answered, "Martial uncle, are you here to inquire about the news?" Mo Chenga nodded. "Correct. I have an old friend among the disciples of Mount Li. May I know how he's doing now?" The 2 aura-refining disciples glanced at each other. One of them said, "Martial uncle, we also don't know much. We only know that the situation isn't good." "Martial uncle, you mustn't tell anyone about this. Aura-refining disciples still don't know about it." "Yes, I know. The situation is not good. Are there any casualties?" "It seems so. You don't have to worry, Martial uncle. You'll get the news from Martial Uncle Luo soon." Presumably, these 2 disciples didn't dare to reveal too much, so Mo Chenga no longer asked. "Alright, thank you." Not long after Mo Chenga returned from the steward's hall, Master Taoist Shenin sent her a message telling all disciples to go to his immortal's cave. Mo Chenga hurried over and saw that almost all of Martial Uncle Xuanin's disciples had arrived. Everyone was standing solemnly with anxious expressions on their faces. Mo Chenga quietly walked up to Luo Fengxue. Luo Fengxue shook her head at her and sighed softly. Mo Chenga's heart sank when she saw Mo Chenga's tired expression and worried gaze. Once all the disciples had arrived, Master Taoist Shenin finally opened his eyes. With a solemn expression he said, "You probably know the situation with the demonic beast riot this time isn't good. I asked you to come here to tell you about this." "Snow." Luo Fengxue raised her head and stepped forward. "Yes, Master. You talk to them." Luo Fengxue responded. She then turned around with a solemn expression and said, "Senior martial brothers and sisters, today, the steward's hall received a message from a Mount Li disciple saying Martial Uncle Hanyu of Drifting Cloud Peak has fallen." As soon as she finished speaking, everyone's expression changed. They all knew what the death of a core formation cultivator meant. The battle this time would definitely be very intense. Next, they would definitely need to rescue him. Could it be that this time, their master, Luo Fengxue continued on, the head elder has already decided to send another group of disciples as reinforcements. The number of disciples will be similar to last time. Each peak will send 1 core formation cultivator, several elite disciples, and about 10 ordinary disciples. Our Clear Spring Peak has already decided that Martial Uncle Shou Jing will be going. Martial Uncle Shou Jing doesn't have any disciples, so the elite disciples will be chosen from among us. Mo Chenga was stunned. In Xianqing School, the cultivators who went to battle last time weren't too outstanding, but their cultivation levels weren't weak either. Clearly, the battle wasn't urgent. However, Martial Uncle Shou Jing was Grandmaster Jinghe's favorite disciple. His cultivation level and divine abilities were among the best among Xianqing School's core formation cultivators. Now, the battle had just started, but they already had to send him out. Apparently the situation was very bad. What she could think of, the other disciples naturally already thought of. Those who were familiar with each other were currently discussing in low voices. Some were anxious, some were worried. Enough, Master Taoist Xiaonin said, stopping the disciples from whispering to each other. Who among you wants to go? None of the dozen or so disciples present answered him. After a while, someone finally stepped forward and asked, Master, isn't the current situation very critical? Master Taoist Xiaonin nodded slightly. There's no need to hide this matter from you. We received news from the outside that the casualties of the first batch of disciples we sent have reached 30%. If you go now, it'll naturally be very dangerous. After he finished speaking, his gaze swept through the disciples and he said, Among you, those in the early stage of the foundation building realm don't need to go. Mo Chenga quickly swept her gaze around and discovered that everyone was dumbfounded. Her master actually said that those in the early stage of the foundation building realm didn't need to go. Clearly it was extremely dangerous. Although elite disciples like them were superior to ordinary disciples in fights of magical powers, they also cherished their lives more than ordinary disciples. Asking them to volunteer was too difficult. After a long time no one stepped forward. Master Taoist Xiaonin wrinkled his brows and said with displeasure, Is there no one willing? Master, a crisp female voice rang out, I'll go. Mo Chenga looked up and was stunned. It was actually her second martial sister, Wei Jiasi. Frankly speaking, Mo Chenga didn't have a very good impression of this senior martial sister Wei. Probably because her aptitude was excellent, her behavior was arrogant and she rarely looked people in the eye. Mo Chenga's keen senses told her that this senior martial sister Wei looked down on her. However, she really didn't expect that this senior martial sister Wei would be so unyielding. She was obviously willing to go to a very dangerous place. Master Taoist Xiaonin finally smiled as he looked at Wei Jiasi. Jiasi, you're very good. Who else wants to go? Mo Chenga swept her gaze over the crowd. Wei Jiasi's expression was still calm, but there seemed to be a hint of determination in her eyes. Could it be that she had a reason to go? Master, I'm also willing. Me too. After a while, two more disciples stepped forward. Master Taoist Xiaonin showed a gratified smile and said, Good, very good. I'm very happy that you're willing to fight for the school. Everyone else can leave but the three of you stay. Yes, Master. Chenga, let's go. After saluting Master Taoist Xiaonin, Luo Fengxue quietly grabbed Mo Chenga's hand and pulled her out of the cave. After leaving Master Taoist Xuanin's cave, the two of them walked for a while before Mo Chenga asked, Senior Martial Sister Luo, is the situation really that dangerous? Luo Fengxue rubbed her red eyes and nodded. If it wasn't dangerous, Grandmaster wouldn't have let Martial Uncle Shoujing go. I hope Martial Uncle Shoujing and Martial Uncle Qingyuan can come back safely. What are you thinking about? Mo Chenga thought for a while then answered, I'm thinking about Senior Martial Sister Wei. Luo Fengxue let out a ha, and patted Mo Chenga's shoulder. Do you think it's amazing that second martial sister is willing to take the risk? Not really. But it's indeed very rare. Most cultivators were selfish. Even if it was a famous cultivation group that cultivated one's mind, there weren't many people who were willing to go even though they knew it was dangerous. Luo Fengxue chuckled, patted Mo Chenga's shoulder and said earnestly, Don't be too easily moved. Second martial sister took the initiative to go because, halfway through her sentence, Luo Fengxue stopped talking and looked around to make sure there was no one around before she continued in a low voice, because of Martial Uncle Shoujing. And? Mo Chenga was confused. Luo Fengxue couldn't help but pat Mo Chenga's head. Stupid. Just you wait, there must be other female disciples in our Clear Spring Peak who are willing to go. Ha! Mo Chenga thought for a while and seemed to understand a little. You mean, Luo Fengxue rolled her eyes and muttered, In my opinion, it's their brains that aren't clear. What kind of person is Martial Uncle Shoujing? If their cultivation levels can't catch up, what's the use of thinking about it? The lifespan of us cultivators is far longer than that of mortals. If we don't have the same lifespan, how many years can we stay together? In the end, Luo Fengxue sighed. Who said the distance between cultivators and mortals was far? It was the same between cultivators. The lifespan of foundation building cultivators and core formation cultivators was at least 300 years apart. Even if they loved each other like honey, they still couldn't love each other to the end. Mo Chenga said strangely, There are so many core formation cultivators, but why do they only like Martial Uncle Shoujing? We're not mortal women, do you think they only look at appearances? Luo Fengxue patted Mo Chenga's head again, but this time she was praising her. That's right. That's why I said they're not clear. They're walking on the path of cultivation, but they're actually the same as mortal women. However, it's not strange for martial uncle Shojing to be liked. His aptitude is good, his cultivation level is high, he's handsome, and he's very young. None of the foundation building senior martial brothers in our school can compare to him. Really? Mo Chenga was curious. I haven't seen martial uncle Shojing yet. What does he look like? Luo Fengxue wanted to say something but didn't dare to. She said helplessly, he looks quite similar to senior martial brother Qin. Oh, think about it. This year, martial uncle Shojing, and he's only 140 years old. At this age, he's already in the middle stage of the core formation realm. If he's lucky, it's not impossible for him to advance to the nascent soul realm before he's 200 years old. Moreover, martial uncle Shojing has a good temper. Although he doesn't like to talk and is a cultivation maniac, it's precisely because of this that he's likable. Sometimes women are the same as men. The colder and more arrogant a man is, the more they want to conquer him, isn't that right? Mo Chenga stared at the sky and thought for a moment before she shook her head. I don't think so. In other words, this martial uncle Shojing was quite similar to senior martial brother Qin. However, to be honest, if it wasn't because they'd been together for several months, which made her develop a sense of dependence, she wouldn't have thought senior martial brother Qin was very likable. Most cultivators weren't ugly, and there were also a lot of them who were handsome. Moreover, most of them were cultivation maniacs, so there didn't seem to be anything special about them. Luo Fengxue looked defeated by Mo Tienga. I admit defeat. I don't have that kind of tenacity. Forget it. Mo Tienga smiled then asked, Senior Martial Sister Luo, are you saying Senior Martial Sister Wei likes Martial Uncle Shojing? Others don't know but I do. Luo Fengxue said quite disdainfully, Martial Uncle Shojing occasionally comes out to give sermons, and second Martial Sister always goes. Moreover, you also know that martial uncle Shojing doesn't have any disciples, so inner disciples like us often get errands and go to martial uncle Shojing's immortal's cave to handle some chores. Senior martial sister Wei goes there every time. What? Luo Fengxue looked around but didn't see anyone, so she lowered her voice and continued to say, About this matter, I have to tell you about someone first. We used to have a martial uncle Qingyuan, Grandmaster's second disciple, but he died in an accident. His descendant, one of our senior martial sisters, was taken to Clear Spring Peak by Grandmaster. This happened more than 100 years ago. At that time, martial uncle Shojing had just been taken to Mount Taikong by Grandmaster. The two of them were about the same age, so Grandmaster taught them together. As for this senior martial sister of ours, her aptitude is a bit lacking, but fortunately with Grandmaster personally teaching her, how bad could she be? Just like martial uncle Shojing, she also built her foundation at the age of 20. But this senior martial sister, probably because she grew up with martial uncle Shojing and because Grandmaster personally taught her, she became complacent and always regarded martial uncle Shojing as something. Luo Fengxue continued to say, later, when martial uncle Shojing's cultivation level surpassed this senior martial sister's, Grandmaster gave him his own immortal's cave. After that, he rarely contacted this senior martial sister. You also know that martial uncle Shojing is a cultivation maniac. Aside from cultivating, he doesn't like anything else, so this senior martial sister's wish naturally fell through. However, she has a bad temper and always makes things difficult for the female disciples who work in martial uncle's immortal's cave. So senior martial sister Wei was put in a difficult position? Exactly. Luo Fengxue curled her lips. At that time, second martial sister was only in the early stage of the foundation building realm while this senior martial sister was in the middle stage. I don't know why she went crazy, but she actually beat second martial sister until she suffered internal injuries and vomited blood. Because of this, Grandmaster let that senior martial sister go outside. Right now, we don't even know which courtyard she's in. Mo Chenga was rendered speechless by this show of jealousy and jealousy. Immortal clans, prestigious cultivation groups. Unexpectedly, they also had this kind of gossip. Don't tell others about this. I'll tell you the details when I have time. I'm exhausted, I'm going to rest first. Chapter 107. Before long, the second batch of demon-exterminating disciples set off. Senior martial sister Wei was among them. They set off quietly. When Mo Chenga found out, she only received a sound-transmitting talisman at the entrance of her cave. It was sent by Qin Shi, saying he was also on the list of the second batch of disciples, but time was tight so he couldn't say goodbye to her. Mo Chenga only stared blankly for a moment before continuing to cultivate and concoct medicinal pills as usual. She couldn't meddle in these things, but she had to be prepared in case she was sent out of the sect during the fierce battle. A large cultivation group like Xianqing School had about 500 foundation-building cultivators, but they sent out more than 200 in these 2 consecutive battles, which accounted for half of the total number of disciples. According to the news they received last time, the casualties of the first batch of disciples were about 30 to 40 people. For a medium-sized cultivation group, the loss of 30 to 40 foundation-building cultivators was an immeasurable loss. Even a large cultivation group like Xianqing School couldn't underestimate it. Moreover, the battle had just started and was fierce. After this demonic beast riot, Xianqing School would probably lose at least 100 foundation-building cultivators, which was enough to wipe out a medium-sized cultivation group. In that case, only a few foundation-building cultivators in the school would be able to escape this disaster. Therefore, she had to be prepared in case she was sent out to participate in the battle without any means to protect herself. Time passed day by day. A tense atmosphere gradually filled the entire Xianqing School. Mo Chenga learned from Luo Fengxue that the whole of Kunwu was involved in the demonic beast riot. If Xianqing School hadn't issued a mountain sealing order and activated the Great Mountain Protecting Formation at the beginning, all the aura refining disciples would have been killed. Although there were many casualties among the foundation building disciples, the aura refining disciples weren't affected. Therefore, even if Xianqing School suffered heavy losses, it could recover in 100 or 200 years, and the school's strength wouldn't decline. After learning about this, Mo Chenga couldn't help but sigh. The head Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Taoist Jinyang, was able to predict the direction of the situation at the beginning and avoid losses. Otherwise, Xianqing School wouldn't have been able to escape this disaster. Luo Fengxue wasn't busy these days. Reportedly, because this matter was of great importance, the core formation elders of the school head's generation had taken over all these matters. Right now, the foundation building deacons only needed to pay attention to it from time to time. When she was free, Luo Fengxue came to chat with her every day. Although Mo Chenga was anxious to cultivate the soul refining art, she also knew this matter couldn't be rushed. Every day she just cultivated step by step and chatted with Luo Fengxue. Luo Fengxue was actually busy for nothing. Her aptitude was good, but she wasn't too keen on cultivating. Instead, she liked to deal with miscellaneous matters. There was almost nothing in the entire Clear Spring Peak that she didn't know. She even knew a lot of gossip about the other peaks. Mo Chenga had never come into contact with people like her. However, such a lively scene reminded her of Murong Yen. Mo Chenga wondered whether Murong Yen had built her foundation or not. Hey Chenga, why are you in a daze again? Mo Chenga regained her train of thought and shook her head. It's nothing. I was just thinking. Senior Marshal Sister Luo, you've been really free lately. I kinda missed the times when you were busy. Artist Luo. She said out and said mo, she mo, Luo and she, he and. Luo Fengxue glared at her and said, if eldest Marshal Sister wasn't here, I wouldn't bother you. Right now only the 2 of us live here. If I didn't talk to you, would I talk to the spiritual beast? Luo Fengxue glanced at her and remembered something. By the way, how old are you, Chenga? Mo Chenga thought about it and sighed. 24. In the blink of an eye, it's been almost 4 years since I came to Xianqing School. These past 4 years had been too smooth for her, so she felt time passed quickly. Oh, if I remember correctly, you're 1 year younger than me. Are you practicing a youthful cultivation technique? You look the same as when you first came. I think so. Luo Fengxue shouted, you really don't know how lucky you are. A youthful cultivation technique. We female cultivators mostly cultivate to stay young. With a suitable youthful cultivation technique, we can save a lot of look-preserving pills. Many people are envious of us, but you're actually saying I think so. Mo Chenga felt a bit guilty. She got her cultivation technique too easily, so she didn't cherish it. You. Luo Fengxue shook her head and sighed. You're smart, but you're slow. You're stupid, but you're very good at controlling your limits. I can't even tell what kind of person you are. Mo Chenga was very curious. Senior Marshal Sister Luo, how many kinds of people do you classify? Luo Fengxue thought for a while, then said, it's actually quite simple. Look at the 2 senior Marshal Sisters living here and me. We each have one kind of person. Eldest Marshal Sister is the most likable kind. She's considerate like a woman and has the spirit of loyalty like a man. Second Marshal Sister is the kind that's neither likable nor hateful. She's too lazy to pay attention to other people and doesn't look for trouble. As for me, I'm the kind that most people like but a few don't. You see, I'm very popular. Among the disciples of Clear Spring Peak, I dare say I know the most people. Luo Fengxue praised herself for a while, then said, there's also the kind that most people dislike. They're the kind that doesn't have a good character but isn't narrow-minded. The last kind is the kind that's completely hated by others. The representative is our senior martial sister who was sent out of Mount Taikang. She doesn't have any self-awareness and only has herself in her heart. She thinks everyone has to revolve around her. Almost everyone hates this kind of person. Upon hearing Luo Fengxue talking about this gossip, Mo Chenga asked, could it be that this senior martial sister has no likability at all? Now that you've asked, I really can't remember. It happened a long time ago. At that time, I think I was only 11 or 12 years old. I remember it happened not long after Martial Uncle Shoujing returned from Demonic Mountain. At that time, Martial Uncle Shoujing's cultivation level dropped greatly and he barely survived. Second Martial Sister accepted the task of taking care of Martial Uncle Shoujing's cave while he was in closed-door meditation. Who would have thought that that senior Martial Sister actually hated Second Martial Sister for being able to take care of Martial Uncle Shoujing? She made a big fuss and even attacked Second Martial Sister. Think about it, Martial Uncle Shoujing almost lost his life but she still cared about being jealous. Naturally, she greatly offended Martial Uncle and Grandmaster. It was because of her father that Grandmaster didn't punish her. He only told her to leave Xianqing School and go to the branch courtyard to reflect on her mistakes for several decades. Alas, in any case, I've never heard of anyone liking her. Oh, this kind of person was indeed unlikable. She didn't even have a sense of propriety. Speaking of eldest Martial Sister, I wonder how she's doing. I'm not really worried about Second Martial Sister. In any case, Martial Uncle Shoujing is with her. Luo Fengxue looked up at the sky and sighed. There's still no news from Senior Martial Sister Han? There's a bit of news. Luo Fengxue thought for a moment then said, a few days ago, there was news that a secret mark left by Senior Martial Sister was found, but they haven't found her yet. I think it's very likely that Senior Martial Sister is still alive. That's good. No bad news is good news. Luo Fengxue pondered for a moment then clapped her hands and said, you're right. That's exactly what you said. The two of them chatted for a while when they suddenly received a summoning talisman at the same time. Oh, it's Master's. Mo Chenga nodded. Mine too. It seems to be the same thing. Let's go. The two of them finished their chores and rushed to Master Daoist Xuanin's cave together. Master. Martial Uncle. This time, Master Daoist Xuanin wasn't meditating. Instead, he was walking in circles in the hall with his hands behind his back. When he saw them coming in, he stopped and said, good, you're all here. Come here. He turned around and sat down on the main seat. He looked at his disciples with a solemn expression and said in a heavy voice, I called you here because the battle is fierce. Maybe you'll be sent to join the battle in the next moment. Mo Chenga was shocked. She glanced at Luo Fengxue, and both of them looked bewildered. Xianqing School had sent more than 12 core formation cultivators. Even if Martial Uncle Hanyu died, there were still 11 core formation cultivators left. Xianqing School only had a little more than 40 core formation cultivators in total. They'd already sent a quarter of them but they still couldn't hold on? Could it be that one of the martial uncles also died? Master, eldest martial sister, second martial sister, they... Master Daoist Xuanin shook his head. Qingyu has been found, so he's fine. However, with the current situation, it's hard to say whether they can come back or not. I've decided to leave the mountain to provide reinforcements. Among you, those in the middle stage of the foundation building realm and above, follow me into battle. All the disciples were startled, but no one dared to object. Those in the middle stage of the foundation building realm and above all answered in a low voice, yes, Master. As for you two. Master Daoist Xuanin looked at Mo Chenga and Luo Fengxue. You two in the early stage of the foundation building realm also mustn't relax. I reckon that before long, you'll also have to leave the mountain to participate in the demon exterminating battle. Therefore, I'll give you some magic tools and talismans first. Take them with you. Yes, Master. Mo Chenga and Luo Fengxue glanced at each other, then each took the magic tools and talismans from Master Daoist Xuanin. After listening to his admonishment for a while, they finally left Master Daoist Xuanin's cave. The two of them walked in silence for a while. Finally, Mo Chenga said hesitantly, Senior Martial Sister Luo, do you have any way to inquire about the specific situation? And? Luo Fengxue asked absent-mindedly, "What kind of information do you want to inquire about?" "One of them is Big Brother Yi, whom you also know. The other one is Senior Marshal Brother Qin. Last time, Senior Marshal Brother Qin said he also wanted to go to battle, but I haven't heard any news from him." Luo Fengxue said, "Your Senior Marshal Brother Qin will definitely be fine, but it's hard to say for Senior Marshal Brother Yi. Rest assured, I'll go to the Steward's Hall and ask the other Senior Marshal brothers and sisters." "How can you be so sure?" "Of course." Luo Fengshue's eyes shifted. Senior Marshal Brother Qin's identity is special. He definitely won't be allowed to participate in dangerous matters. Besides, there's also Marshal Uncle Shoujing. And that's true. That being said, Mo Chenga still felt uneasy. In any case, Yi Jingwen advanced into the foundation building realm many years ago and was now in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Qin Shi, on the other hand, advanced only a few years ago. Most likely, his realm hadn't even stabilized yet, let alone his divine abilities. Even if he had a lot of treasures on him without a cultivation level, it would all be in vain. However, she didn't have to worry for long because not long after Marshal Uncle Xianin left the mountain, she received a notice to leave the mountain with Luo Fengxue to provide support. Chapter 108. Mo Chenga frowned as she stared at the billowing smoke and dust below. She had never thought that there would be such a chaotic scene outside. The fleeing crowd was chased by low-level demonic beasts. Those who couldn't escape in time were caught up by the demonic beasts. They were either torn to a bloody pulp or swallowed whole. All of a sudden she clenched her fists and bit her lips. In the end, she still retained some of her rationality and looked at Master Taoist Sushin. Marshal Uncle Sushin? Taoist Master Sushin was a woman with a cold expression. At this moment she raised her hand and shot a horsetail whisk at the demon beast below. Upon seeing this, Mo Chenga and the others attacked one after another. Blood splattered everywhere and limbs flew everywhere. These were all low-level demonic beasts, and with a few dozen of them taking action, they were immediately cleaned up. Mo Chenga wiped the blood off her hand, then glanced at Luo Fengxue. Luo Fengshue's complexion was a bit pale. She whispered, "How could this be?" Mo Chenga saw that Luo Yunyang was trembling. She knew Luo Yunyang had been a disciple of a famous cultivation group since she was a child and had never experienced such a bloody scene. Mo Chenga held Luo Yunyang's hand and said, "Senior Marshal Sister Luo, let's just kill the demonic beast." Luo Fengxue finally regained her composure after a long time. She shook her head and said, "Don't worry, I can adapt." He then smiled bitterly. "In fact, our Shenqing school has always been prepared for danger in times of peace. Most of our disciples have experienced fighting. It's just that I like doing chores, so I never thought there'd be a day when I'd need to fight by myself. Alas, I've indulged myself too much." Most of these people were mortals who lived in a certain city or a certain clan. Now that they were saved, they all knelt down and kowtowed. There were even some who begged bitterly to be brought to a safe place. Feeling a bit sad, Mo Chenga turned to look at Master Taoist Sushin. Master Taoist Sushin shook her head and said, "We have other important matters to attend to. We can't delay any longer." Mo Chenga knew what Master Taoist Sushin said wasn't false. Their group only had about 20 people in total. If they sent these mortals away and came back later, they wouldn't know how long they'd have to drag things out. The longer they arrived one day later, the more difficult the situation would be. Since it was beyond his power, there was no need to force it. However, someone shouted, "Uncle Master, if we don't do anything, these mortals will probably die." Master Taoist Master Sushin glanced at that person coldly. "Although our Tao school scrupulously abides by the rules, we still need to weigh the consequences. If these mortals leave Kunwu Mountain as soon as possible, they'll be able to keep their lives. Let's go." As he spoke, he controlled his flying magic treasure and instantly left this place. The immortal path was not heartless, but there was a limit to it. Mo Chenga sighed inwardly but didn't say anything. Several days later, they finally arrived at their destination. Mount Taikang had a great mountain-protecting formation. The demonic beasts once suffered losses from this heaven and earth life-killing formation, so they didn't dare to attack directly. Instead, they kept harassing the small cultivation groups and clans attached to Shenqing School in the vicinity of Mount Taikang. It was precisely because of this that Shenqing School couldn't stay out of this matter. Many of the disciples and resources of big cultivation groups came from these cultivation clans and small cultivation groups. Without them, half of Shenqing School's foundation would be ruined. Before she left the mountain, Mo Chinga already knew that the war in West Kunwu was mainly happening at Luoyen Cliff. Most of those cultivation clans and small cultivation groups had also moved there. From afar, everyone could see that there was a large array set up on the cliff. Within the array there were tents all over the mountain. Master Taoist Sushin looked at this scene with a deep frown on her face. She led them to stop outside the array. A group of patrolling cultivators came over and respectfully saluted them. "May I ask Senior Xianqing School's Taoist name?" Master Taoist Sushin's disciple stepped forward and answered, "My master's Taoist name is Sushin. We came to help under the orders of the sect." "Oh, so it's Master Taoist Sushin. Sorry for not coming out to greet you. I'm Hong Yuan from the Shangqing sect, currently responsible for patrolling Luoyen Cliff. Please show me your sect identity tablet. Please forgive me if I offended you in any way." Hong Yuan was polite, but he didn't forget his duty. Although they were all wearing Xianqing School's uniform, he still remembered to check their identity tablets. Master Taoist Sushin nodded slightly and took out a jade tablet. Hong Yuan personally confirmed it and said respectfully, "Senior, please wait here for a moment. I'll inform Senior Lingxi to open the formation." After obtaining Master Taoist Sushin's permission, Hong Yuan sent a sound-transmitting talisman. Before long, a core formation cultivator wearing Xianqing School's uniform came over with several disciples. He said happily, "Senior Martial Sister Sushin, you're also here." Master Taoist Sushin still looked cold, but her gaze softened a bit. "Junior Martial Brother Lingxi, how's the situation?" Mo Chinga hadn't seen this Master Taoist Lingxi before, but he still looked young, so he must be a talented person. Master Taoist Lingxi said, "Senior Martial Sister, please come in first. We'll talk about the details later." He then led everyone into the formation. The disciples behind him arranged for the foundation building cultivators while he welcomed Master Taoist Sushin into the big tent. Mo Chinga and Luo Fengxue listened to their respective arrangements, but Master Taoist Sushin was stunned when she entered the tent. There were more than 20 cultivators sitting inside the tent, all of whom were in the core formation realm. Most of them belonged to Xianqing School, but there were also some cultivators from small cultivation groups attached to Xianqing School. This was probably the majority of Xianqing School's cultivators participating in the battle. Why did they gather here? "Junior Martial Sister Sushin, you're also here." Master Taoist Xianin sighed when he saw her. Including Sushin, Clear Spring Peak had a total of 7 core formation cultivators. 4 of them were already here, and the number of cultivators from the other peaks was also about the same. Thus, half of Xianqing School's core formation cultivators were already involved in this demonic beast riot. After greeting everyone, Master Taoist Sushin went to sit next to Master Taoist Xianin. "Senior Martial Brother Xianin, how's the situation now?" Master Taoist Xianin shook his head. "Several core formation cultivators died several days ago." "What?" Master Taoist Sushin frowned and glanced around. 7 or 8 core formation cultivators from Xianqing School weren't here. "What about Junior Martial Brother Qingyuan and Junior Martial Brother Shoujing?" Master Taoist Xianin said, "Junior Martial Brother Qingyuan went out to carry out a mission." "Junior Martial Brother Shoujing?" He paused. Master Taoist Sushin anxiously asked, "What's wrong?" "Junior Martial Brother Shoujing is missing." Master Taoist Xianin furrowed his brows. "During the battle a few days ago, Junior Martial Brother Shoujing fought against a 7th rank Radiant Beast. Since then we haven't been able to contact him. There are also other core formation cultivators, but some of them are missing. We're currently discussing this matter." "Missing?" Master Taoist Sushin shook her head and said calmly, "Although a 7th rank Radiant Beast is equivalent to a late-stage core formation cultivator, Junior Martial Brother Shoujing has always been quick-witted and has magic weapons to escape, so his life shouldn't be in danger. I'm afraid he's injured and is hiding somewhere to recuperate." "That's what I think too." Master Taoist Xianin nodded, but the worry on his face didn't diminish. "It's just that the current battle situation is really bad. Junior Martial Brother Shoujing is still outside, so I'm still worried." Master Taoist Sushin nodded. After a while she asked, "Senior Martial Brother Xianin, how strong are the opponents? We have so many core formation cultivators, but we actually can't gain the upper hand?" Master Taoist Xianin smiled bitterly. "The opponents have 5 or 6 7th rank demonic beasts, plus more than a dozen 6th and 5th rank demonic beasts. They outnumber us and their cultivation levels are also slightly higher." "This is really... They actually have so many 7th rank demonic beasts?" Master Taoist Sushin was shocked. 7th-rank demonic beasts were equivalent to late-stage core formation cultivators, but there weren't many late-stage core formation cultivators among them. Exactly, it's very troublesome. Master Daoist Xianin shook his head. What? Mo Qianga, who was staying in the temporary tent, was shocked when she heard the news Luo Fengxue inquired about. Luo Fengxue continued to say, I heard Martial Uncle Shoujing was fighting a 7th-rank demonic beast, but he lost contact with him later. It's been 7 or 8 days now. Mo Qianga stopped what she was doing and sat down. What about senior martial brother Qin? He's also missing. Luo Fengxue glanced at her. Don't worry. Didn't you say no news is good news? Mo Qianga sat in a daze for a while then asked, have they looked for him? I only heard that Martial Uncle Qingyuan might have gone to look for Martial Uncle Shoujing. There's still no news so I'm not sure. Mo Qianga no longer said anything. She held her breath in her heart. She really couldn't let it go, but her reason told her that she couldn't help in this matter and being anxious would be useless. She stood up, thought about it then sat down again. After repeating this several times, Luo Fengxue finally couldn't stand it anymore. Calm down. With Martial Uncle Shoujing's cultivation level, he'll be fine. I'm not talking about Martial Uncle Shoujing. Mo Qianga closed her eyes and took a deep breath, but she realized it was futile. Her chest was still thumping. She wanted to rush out but she didn't know what to do. Luo Fengxue looked pensive. After staring at her for a long time she suddenly said, Do you like senior martial brother Qin? Mo Qianga was stunned. She shook her head. No, if you don't, why are you in such a hurry? I'm just worried. You don't like him, so what are you worried about? Luo Fengxue frowned and said sternly, Qianga, I advise you that if you really have such thoughts, you should control your heart. I know. Mo Qianga sat down dejectedly. She covered her face and said, I admit I used to, but I know what you want to say. I can also swear that I don't have any delusions right now, I just regard him as a friend. If the one who went missing today was Big Brother Yi or you, I'd also be worried. Luo Fengxue was silent for a long time before she sighed softly. Alright, I won't say much, although I think you definitely don't know. Know what? Right after she finished speaking, a voice came from outside. Soon afterward, a woman lifted the curtain and walked in. Eldest martial sister. Upon hearing Luo Fengxue's greeting, Mo Qianga looked up and saw Han Qingyu looking at them with a smile. She hastily stood up and said, Senior martial sister Han. Han Qingyu looked like an amiable and gentle woman. Although she wasn't very beautiful, she was very likable and always had a smile on her face. Luo Fengxue immediately rushed over and shouted in surprise, Eldest martial sister, are you all right? I'm fine. Han Qingyu affectionately patted Luo Fengxue's head. She was much older than Luo Fengxue. According to seniority in the secular world, she was old enough to be Luo Fengxue's great-grandmother. She watched Luo Fengxue grow up and treated her like a junior. After comforting Luo Fengxue, Han Qingyu turned around and said to Mo Qianga with a smile, Qianga, I haven't congratulated you on building your foundation. You must be tired from the journey, right? Mo Qianga smiled and said, Thank you, senior martial sister Han. It's great that you're all right. We were all very worried. Han Qingyu gracefully smiled and sat down. She then softly reprimanded Luo Fengxue. Fengxue, in the future, you can't say this kind of thing carelessly. There are a lot of people here. Who knows who might hear you? Luo Fengxue nodded obediently. I understand, eldest martial sister. Han Qingyu smiled and nodded. She then turned around and said to Mo Qianga, I came to see you and tell you about the current situation. Perhaps you'll soon have to face demonic beasts so you can be mentally prepared. Chapter 109. Mo Qianga. Upon hearing her name, Mo Qianga stepped forward. There were 7 or 8 cultivators standing next to her. They were the ones whose names were called and who had to accept the same mission. Master Daoist Xianin solemnly swept his gaze over them and said, Wei Jiasi will be the leader of your group. Your mission is to rescue injured fellow Daoists. Do you hear me? Yes. Master Daoist Xianin waved his hand and said, Go. Mo Qianga silently followed Wei Jiasi and left the area. Their group of foundation building cultivators was either injured or had weak cultivation levels. Obviously, Master Daoist Xianin deliberately gave them an easy mission. After flying away from Luoyan Cliff, the battle hadn't started yet. The 8 of them stood on the hillside for a while before they saw demonic beasts approaching one after another. Cultivators from Luoyan Cliff also came out to meet them. After a while Mo Chenga heard Luo Fengxue whisper, "Look over there." Mo Chenga looked up and saw a long-tailed demonic beast in the sky. Judging from its momentum, it was probably in the 5th rank or higher. It was fighting against more than a dozen foundation-building cultivators, but it didn't seem to be at a disadvantage. This long-tailed demonic beast's tail was several feet long. Every time it swung its tail, if someone didn't dodge in time, they would fall from their flying magic tool. Upon seeing this, Wei Jiasi ordered, "Go and rescue them." The 8 of them each flew towards the heavily injured people and carried them to the back of Luoyan Cliff. Once the battle started, this was the place where the injured were treated. As soon as they carried the injured people over, someone came to greet them. Wei Jiasi called out, "Senior Marshal Brother Quang." The person who came was also wearing Shenqing School's disciple robes. He was in the peak stage of the foundation building realm. His attitude was very cold, but his every move was graceful. The person just nodded at Wei Jiasi, then turned around and called out, "Little Bai." An early-stage foundation-building youngster ran over from behind. "Senior Marshal Brother Quangzhu." Someone had already taken over the injured people. This Senior Marshal Brother Quang said as he walked inside, "Is the medicine ready? Let's start." The youngster just nodded at them, then went inside. Even though she was treated so coldly, the always arrogant Wei Jiasi didn't show any displeasure. She just glanced at them and said, "Continue." Mo Chenga followed her and flew away, continuing to cooperate with Luo Fengxue and search for the injured people to bring them to the back. Once they were far away from Wei Jiasi, Luo Fengxue whispered, "Are you very curious?" Mo Chenga glanced at the battlefield not far away and nodded. Luo Fengxue smiled mysteriously. Senior Marshal Brother Quangzhu is the #1 foundation-building disciple. Aside from Marshal Uncle Shoujing, he's the most popular male disciple in the group. Is that so? Senior Marshal Brother Quang was indeed handsome and elegant. Isn't that so? Luo Fengxue sighed when she noticed Mo Chenga was still in a daze. Forget it, I won't tease you anymore. It's indeed a bit hard on you. Senior Marshal Sister Luo. How could Mo Chenga not know that Luo Fengxue was doing this for her own good? However, how could she smile now? Luo Fengxue signaled Mo Chenga that she didn't need to say anything more. The 2 of them continued to search for the wounded in silence. Sometimes, when they saw the mangled corpses, Luo Fengxue's face would turn pale, making Mo Chenga very worried. Fortunately, Mo Chenga quickly adapted to the situation. As time went by, the fights of magical power became more and more intense. Occasionally, a 5th rank or higher demonic beast would appear, and core formation seniors would fight them. Fights of magical power between cultivators of this level were earth-shattering, so it was inevitable that low-level cultivators would be affected as well. Mo Chenga and Luo Fengxue had no choice but to split up to rescue people. While they were on their way, a strong wind suddenly swept over them. Mo Chenga, who was standing on her flying sword, lost her balance and almost fell off. She stepped on the flying sword in time and turned a corner, only to see a 3rd-rank demonic beast chasing after them. Cold sweat immediately trickled down her back. The demonic beast's eyes revealed an ominous glint. It clapped its palms together and a red beam of light shot towards them. Mo Chenga controlled her flying sword to dodge everywhere. She held a talisman in one hand and the shuttle of flying Apsara in the other and threw it out. The shuttle of flying Apsara turned into a golden light, then into a thin ray of light, flying towards the demonic beast in a dense formation. A 3rd-rank demonic beast was equivalent to a middle-stage foundation-building cultivator. Ever since Mo Chenga broke through, she hadn't fought with others. At this moment, she carefully controlled the shuttle of flying Apsara while throwing talismans in her other hand. These talismans were given to her by Marshal Uncle Shenin before they left. When they arrived here, she and Luo Fengxue went to greet him and he gave them many more talismans to protect them. Wind and rain rustling, and wind blowing clouds chaotic. Several high-level wind element talismans were thrown at the demonic beast, forcing it to take a few steps back. Mo Chenga immediately withdrew the shuttle of flying Apsara and controlled her flying sword to flee at full speed. However, demonic beasts had thick skin, so the power of the attacks was often reduced when they landed on their bodies. She was only a breath late, so the demonic beast caught up with her again. Mo Chenga turned her head to look around. The fight was in full swing, so no one came to help her. Moreover, the demonic beast was extremely fast. Just as it was about to catch up, she raised her hand and released the shuttle of flying Apsara again. This demonic beast was already a 3rd-rank demonic beast, so its intelligence was different from that of wild animals. It knew the power of the shuttle of flying Apsara, so it immediately slapped its front paw, releasing a fire element spell from its palm. Chenga controlled her flying sword to circle around the demonic beast. She released the shuttle of flying Apsara from time to time, restraining the demonic beast's movements. Whenever the demonic beast attacked, she would retreat a bit. While it was casting its spell, she would control the golden ray to stab it. After repeating this several times, the demonic beast was enraged and went berserk. Chenga was greatly alarmed when flames came crashing down from the sky. She didn't expect this demonic beast could actually use this kind of spell. She quickly moved forward to avoid it, but she felt a sharp pain in her back. She couldn't avoid it and was burned. Chenga trembled and almost lost control of the shuttle of flying Apsara. Just as the demonic beast's huge paw was about to hit her again, a flying sword suddenly flew from the side and firmly pierced the demonic beast's head. The demonic beast cried out in pain. Chenga seized this opportunity and withdrew the shuttle of flying Apsara. All the golden rays pierced the demonic beast's head. She then pointed her finger and the golden rays broke through its body. The demonic beast roared and finally fell to the ground. Chenga turned her head and saw Wei Jiaxi's cold figure. "Thank you, Senior Martial Sister Wei." Chenga cupped her hands gratefully. Wei Jiaxi humped softly but didn't answer. Instead she turned around and left. Chenga couldn't help but smile bitterly. Although she saved her, this Senior Martial Sister Wei still hated her. However, as she watched Wei Jiaxi's back, Chenga gradually frowned. This direction. Chenga didn't have time to think carefully. Ignoring the pain in her back, she followed Wei Jiaxi. When she was fighting the demonic beast just now, she had already left the main battlefield. She originally thought Wei Jiaxi just happened to pass by, but now it seemed that this wasn't the case. Although she seemed to be chasing a demonic beast, Chenga knew Wei Jiaxi was in charge of treating the injured, so she didn't need to do this. After walking for a short distance, Chenga saw Luo Fengshue's figure. After thinking for a moment, she sent her a sound-transmitting talisman. Luo Fengshue received the sound-transmitting talisman. She looked up and found Chenga's location, then flew over. "What's the matter, Chenga?" Chenga pointed in the distance and said, "Look, it's Senior Martial Sister Wei." Luo Fengshue glanced at her but still didn't understand. "What's wrong with Senior Martial Sister Wei? Look at the direction she's going." Luo Fengshue turned her head and carefully observed for a while. Her expression suddenly changed. "Senior Martial Sister Wei is leaving." Chenga nodded. "Senior Martial Sister Wei is injured. She doesn't have to fight this time, so why chase the demonic beast? There's no one in that direction." Luo Fengshue pondered for a moment, then said, "Let's follow her and take a look." This. Chenga hesitated for a moment. "We still have to look for our injured companions? We're not the only team in charge of looking for the injured. Besides, the battle is about to end, so it'll be fine if we're not here." Chenga looked around and confirmed that the outcome of the battle had already been decided. She nodded and said, "All right." The two of them then restrained their breaths and followed Wei Jiaxi at a leisurely pace. After crossing several low peaks and entering a dense forest, Wei Jiaxi's flying sword suddenly sped up, blocking the path of a second-rank demonic beast that was running ahead of them. A small flag appeared in her hand. She waved the flag and with a thunderous sound, the demonic beast in front of her fell down in an instant. Chenga and Luo Fengshue glanced at each other. Both of them were even more certain that Wei Jiaxi was clearly capable of killing this demonic beast, yet she kept chasing it through the forest. There was definitely a problem. Sure enough, after she killed the demonic beast, she didn't turn back. Instead, she continued to move forward. Her speed was so fast that the two of them almost couldn't keep up. The trees became denser and denser, and they went deeper and deeper into the forest. After an unknown amount of time, Wei Jiaxi finally stopped. She looked around, seemingly looking for something. "This won't do," Luo Fengshue said in a low voice. "This place is very far from Luoyan Cliff. It's too dangerous. We have to call Second Martial Sister back first." Chenga quickly pulled her back. "But if you call her back now, we won't know what she wants to do." Luo Fengshue stared at Chenga with bright eyes and asked seriously, "Chenga, are you suspecting that Second Martial Sister is—" "Of course not." Chenga interrupted her with a conflicted expression. "Senior Martial Sister Wei just saved me. I know that although her temper isn't good, she's not a bad person. However, her current behavior is really too strange." Luo Fengshue was silent for a moment before she said, "No matter what Second Martial Sister wants to do, I believe her. After she finished speaking, she chased after Wei Jiasi. Mo Chenga wanted to stop her, but her actions had already startled Wei Jiasi. She had no choice but to follow her. Second martial sister. When Wei Jiasi saw them, her expression turned cold. You, second martial sister. Luo Fengshua looked around. There seemed to be traces of fights of magical powers. What are you looking for? Wei Jiasi said coldly, it's none of your business. Luo Fengshua suddenly turned around and stared at Wei Jiasi. Second martial sister, are you looking for martial uncle Shoujing? When she said this, not only Wei Jiasi but Mo Chenga was also shocked. Luo Fengshua said slowly, I heard that martial uncle Shoujing disappeared in this direction a few days ago. At that time he told you foundation building disciples to go back first. There were also traces of fights of magical powers here, so I guessed you must be looking for martial uncle Shoujing. Wei Jiasi's expression changed. In the end she clenched her teeth and said, what I want to do is none of your business. Fengshua, go back. I won't go back. Luo Fengshua stared at her resolutely. Second martial sister, wake up. Martial uncle Shoujing is completely different from us. Some things can't be done just because you want to. Wei Jiasi humphed. I don't want to do anything. If you don't want to do anything, then come back with us. Martial uncle Shoujing's whereabouts are naturally in martial uncle Qingyuan's hands. What's the use of you sneaking out? Even if martial uncle Qingyuan can't find him, can you? Perhaps because Luo Fengshua's accusing tone angered her, anger appeared on Wei Jiasi's face. I told you, it has nothing to do with you. Then martial uncle Shoujing also has nothing to do with you. Luo Fengshua showed no mercy. Second martial sister, you're such a proud person, so why can't you see past this? Think about it yourself. Your aptitude isn't worse than eldest martial sister's. Eldest martial sister entered the late stage of the foundation building realm 10 years ago, but you're still in the middle stage now. Do you think Master doesn't know? Master just wants you to realize it yourself. Luo Fengshua. Unable to restrain her anger, Wei Jiasi glared at them. Chapter 110. Luo Fengshua sneered. She had always been smooth and slick, never arguing with people face to face, but now she couldn't care less. She looked at Wei Jiasi with ridicule in her eyes and said, Second senior martial sister, not to mention martial uncle Shoujing, even I don't like your current appearance. Wei Jiasi was originally a beautiful woman, but right now she was so angry that her face was distorted. She stretched out her hand and a small scarlet flag appeared in her hand. Luo Fengshua didn't attack, but she didn't show any weakness. She took another step forward and said, Could it be that you want to attack a fellow disciple? Second senior martial sister, you can't keep making mistakes. Wei Jiasi looked like she was struggling. Sometimes she was angry, sometimes she was regretful, but in the end she put away the flag. Seeing her like this, Luo Fengshua's expression softened a bit. She said slowly, I've been under Master's tutelage since I was a child. When I was young, second senior martial sister and eldest senior martial sister always took care of me, played with me, and taught me how to cultivate. Second senior martial sister, you're such a smart and respectable person. Although we're not very close now, I still don't want to see you make mistakes. Second senior martial sister, think about it carefully. Martial uncle Shoujing is in the middle stage of the core formation realm now. With his cultivation speed, it's very likely that he'll form his nascent soul within 100 years. If he forms his nascent soul, why would he still care about a foundation building disciple? Don't you know that aside from cultivating, martial uncle Shoujing doesn't like anything else? If your cultivation level can't catch up to his, why would he even care about you? Once Luo Fengshua said this, shock appeared in Wei Jiasi's eyes. She then looked at Mo Chenga again. Mo Chenga didn't understand. She knew Wei Jiasi's gaze meant she was afraid of her, but she already heard most of it. What else couldn't she hear? While Mo Chenga was puzzled, Luo Fengshua already understood Wei Jiasi's meaning. She turned around and said, Chenga, this place is far from Luoyan Cliff. There might be demonic beasts nearby. Can you help us keep a lookout? Mo Chenga immediately understood what Luo Fengshua meant. The relationship between the two of them was deeper than hers, so maybe there was something inconvenient to say in front of her. Thus, Mo Chenga nodded and said, You guys talk first. I'll go take a look. Luo Fengshua responded, but her eyes were filled with gratitude. Mo Chenga chuckled, then turned around and left. Once Mo Chenga's silhouette disappeared, Luo Fengshua waved her hand. A soundproof barrier immediately appeared, surrounding the two of them. Senior martial sister, if you have something to say, just say it. Maybe you've misunderstood something. Wei Jiaxi, who had been staring at the direction Mo Qingge left, had a complicated look in her eyes. At that moment she lowered her gaze and said in a low voice, "Fengxue, since you already know, I won't hide it from you. I originally didn't dare to have too many delusions, but ever since she came." "Senior Martial Sister, are you saying that Martial Uncle Shoujing treats Qingge differently?" Wei Jiaxi nodded. She then smiled bitterly and said, "I know you've always looked down on me regarding this matter, but how could I be willing to let others look down on me? It's just that you've never experienced love, so you don't understand." Luo Fengxue approached Mo Qingge then said calmly, "Second Martial Sister, I did have some complaints about this before, so I hope you can forgive me. Although I don't understand matters of the heart, I know that we aren't mortal women. Naturally we can't be like mortals. In the cultivation world, the only criterion is one's cultivation level. Martial Uncle Shoujing hasn't taken women seriously for so many years, but it's not necessarily because there aren't any women worthy of his attention. Senior Martial Sister, don't tell me it's not because Martial Uncle Shoujing is different from ordinary male disciples?" Wei Jiaxi was silent. Luo Fengshue's words were straightforward, but she couldn't deny it. Not to mention Martial Uncle Shoujing's appearance and identity, these things were, after all, superficial, but why did she have feelings for him? Wei Jiaxi carefully recalled. At first she saw that this martial uncle wasn't much older than them, but he was able to purify his heart, restrain his desires and wholeheartedly cultivate, so she secretly admired him. Later, when she saw that his way of doing things was indeed different from disciples like them and that his cultivation level was even faster, she gradually submitted to him. What if his cultivation level wasn't high? What would happen to me? Wei Jiaxi actually felt a chill run down her spine as she thought about this. She had always thought highly of herself, but only now did she realize that she was actually the same as those women. Second Martial Sister. Wei Jiaxi regained her train of thought and shook her head gently. "I'm fine." Luo Fengxue stared at her worriedly. "What are you thinking about?" Wei Jiaxi was momentarily speechless. After hesitating for a long time she finally said, "Fengxue, do you think I'm as frivolous as those female disciples? Because Martial Uncle is young and has a high cultivation level, so..." "It's nothing." Luo Fengxue smiled and said, "Martial Uncle Shoujing's way of doing things is indeed very different from Senior Martial Brothers, so he's naturally likable. Senior Martial Sister, you know that I don't really like cultivating, but I'm very interested in wielding power. That's why I can see things clearly. You're the smart one." Wei Jiaxi looked at the direction Mo Qingge left and asked in a low voice, "Fengxue, you've always been close to her. Do you know if Martial Uncle really..." Before Wei Jiaxi could finish, Luo Fengxue shook her head and said, "Second Martial Sister, don't think too much. I don't believe Martial Uncle Shoujing has any feelings for Qingge." "But why did Martial Uncle hide his identity from her?" Luo Fengxue also looked puzzled. "I think Martial Uncle Shoujing must have his own intentions. But if he really had any intentions, why did he let Qingge cultivate with us? I saw some of the treasures on her body indeed belong to Martial Uncle. However, even though Martial Uncle Shoujing's concocting skills are superb, I've never seen any medicinal pills on Qingge. Her disciples' rations are the same as ours. It's just that Grandmaster bestowed some things to her." Wei Jiaxi was silent for a long time before Luo Fengxue said, "Second Martial Sister, don't be suspicious of Qingge. Ever since she came I've been with her, so I know everything about her. I'll tell you the truth, she's actually the same kind of person as Martial Uncle Shoujing. She has a firm will and wholeheartedly cultivates. Right now she doesn't have any intentions, but if you're still like this she'll definitely leave you behind in the future. At that time Martial Uncle Shoujing might really look at her in a different light." Wei Jiaxi looked shocked as she stared at Luo Fengxue. Luo Fengxue smiled bitterly and said with a sigh, "Senior Martial Sister, don't think I'm just trying to scare you. Qingge has been here for a long time, and she's the closest to me. I don't have any other skills, but I've always been very good at judging people. With Qingge's temperament, it's only a matter of time before she reaches the peak stage of the foundation building realm. Right now she's Grandmaster's registered disciple. As long as Grandmaster takes good care of her, why would she need to worry about not being able to form her gold core? Martial Uncle Shoujing's talent is outstanding. In Shenqing School the only core formation martial uncle who's the same age as him is Martial Uncle Lingxi, but Martial Uncle Lingxi is a man. If Martial Uncle Shoujing really forms his nascent soul within 100 years and he wants to perform dual cultivation, where would he find a suitable nascent soul cultivator? At that time he'd probably only be able to choose female cultivators in the core formation realm, and they'd also have to be female cultivators with hopes of forming their nascent soul. Second martial sister, if you don't form your gold core, you won't have any hope. At this point, Wei Jiaxi already understood that she'd taken the wrong path. Without a cultivation level, martial uncle Shoujing wouldn't even spare her a glance. If she couldn't form her gold core, she'd be left behind. Alas, all these years she'd actually cast aside her most important cultivation level and neglected the essentials to pursue trifles. Feng Shui, thank you. Wei Jiaxi suddenly felt as if she'd been enlightened. She suddenly felt relaxed. All these years she'd been carrying her feelings on her back, but she didn't dare to let others know. She couldn't abandon them, couldn't bear to part with them. Even her pride and self-esteem had been lost in this difficult pursuit, but she'd forgotten the source of her pride and self-esteem. Without a cultivation level, what right did she have to be proud? What right did she have to make others look at her differently? Upon hearing what Wei Jiaxi said, Luo Fengshui heaved a sigh of relief. Her taut nerves finally relaxed. This place was far from Luoyan Cliff, and there were many demonic beasts in the dense forest. She'd actually been worried. But Wei Jiaxi hesitated. Martial Uncle Shoujing has disappeared. I didn't come here because I was delusional, but my heart is really restless. Second martial sister. Luo Fengshui said anxiously, you're really not as good as Tienga. Tienga is also worried, but she knows her own limits. She's wholeheartedly waiting for martial Uncle Qingyuan's news. If she acted like you, wouldn't she be giving Master more trouble? Wei Jiaxi suddenly frowned. What do you mean? Didn't you say Tienga doesn't have? Luo Fengshui realized she said the wrong thing, but she still said calmly, she thinks it's senior martial brother Qin. But senior martial sister, don't think too much. Tienga only thinks of him as a friend. Is that so? Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly took out her flying sword and took out her magic tool. Second martial sister. Luo Fengshui turned pale with fright. Wei Jiaxi didn't say anything. Her expression was cold and solemn, but a murderous intent emerged in her eyes. She raised her flying sword and the flag at the same time. Luo Fengshui hurriedly took out her own magic tool, but in the next moment she heard a loud bang. She turned her head and was stunned. While controlling the flying sword, Wei Jiaxi chanted an incantation. Soon afterward, she pointed her spiritual aura at the flag. In an instant, the flag expanded and flashed with lightning. Feng Shui, she shouted. Why are you in a daze? There are demonic beasts. Luo Fengshui finally regained her senses. She couldn't help but feel ashamed. She thought her senior martial sister wanted to fight second and third rank demonic beasts. Sensing the breaths of demonic beasts approaching one after another, Luo Fengshui was shocked. The second rank was the early stage of the foundation building realm, while the third rank was the middle stage of the foundation building realm. One of them was in the early stage of the foundation building realm, while the other was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. The difference in numbers was too big. Wei Jiaxi, who was standing on her flying sword, grabbed a few things and stuffed them into Luo Fengshui's hands. She said anxiously, quick. I'll hold them off for a while. You go find Amo Chenga and run back with her. No, senior martial sister, you're alone. Go quickly. Wei Jiaxi shouted. She glanced at the approaching demonic beasts and said anxiously, if you don't leave now, it'll be too late. You've just made a realm breakthrough and you're not good at fights of magical powers. If you stay here, you'll only drag me down. Quickly go back and find someone to save her. But, halfway through her words, the breaths of demonic beasts were getting closer and closer. Senior martial sister, come with me. No, they're too fast. If they come, none of us will be able to escape. Hurry up and be obedient. Luo Fengshui was a decisive person. She immediately clenched her teeth and said, all right, senior martial sister, hold on. She then turned around and dashed towards the direction Mo Tienga left. However, whether it was with her divine sense or her eyes, she couldn't find any trace of Mo Tienga. Tienga. Luo Fengshui shouted anxiously, quickly come out. There are demonic beasts. However, her surroundings were quiet. It was as if Mo Tienga had disappeared. There was no response at all. Chapter 111. Mo Tienga knew there must be a formation in front of her, but she couldn't figure it out. Just now, when Luo Fengshui and Wei Jiaxing talked alone, she left alone, planning to find a place that was neither too far nor too close to keep a lookout for them. However, she accidentally found traces of a formation nearby. That wasn't a big deal, but even with her attainments in formations she couldn't see what this formation was, let alone break it. She had no choice but to go back to look for the two of them. Unexpectedly, she had already fallen into a formation without realizing it and couldn't leave. Everything in front of her was white as if she was in a fog. She couldn't see anything clearly. Emo Chinga pondered for a moment then stopped moving. Instead, she sat cross-legged and spread her divine sense. Since she had entered the foundation building realm, she had explored several kilometers with her divine sense. Since this was a formation, this distance was enough to find the eye of the formation. However, just as she spread her divine sense, the fog around her seemed to be alive. It surged everywhere and blocked her divine sense. She opened her eyes and frowned deeply. No, this formation in front of me is so brilliant. It's definitely not laid by demonic beasts with low intelligence. Is there an expert or senior hiding here? A thought flashed through her mind. She thought of a possibility and shouted, "Martial Uncle Shojing, is Martial Uncle Shojing here?" Her voice slowly dispersed in the fog. Emo Chinga waited for a while but she didn't hear a reply. Did she guess wrong? She thought for a moment then slowly walked forward. This fog was like a cloud, so thick that it was almost solid. She only walked a few steps but she found that it was the same everywhere. She couldn't tell the path and couldn't walk. At that moment, a faint light flashed. She moved sideways and a lightning bolt fell on the ground next to her, leaving a scorched mark. Emo Chinga was shocked. She looked around vigilantly but didn't find any other traces. Behind her, the fog gradually condensed into a human figure walking towards her. Emo Chinga trembled all over and lowered her body. This time it was a flying sword stuck in the ground. She followed the direction of the flying sword and turned around. Shocked, she blurted out, "Second uncle?" She saw a long-bearded old man in cyan clothes standing in the fog several feet away. It was Yi Zhang's appearance before he was injured. Nevertheless, in the next second, Emo Chinga became even more vigilant. She knew second uncle was already dead, so the person in front of her was definitely not second uncle. Could it be that this cloud could actually copy people from her imagination? She didn't have the time to think before Yi Jiang raised his hand and withdrew a jade disc. Emo Chinga broke out in a cold sweat when she saw this jade plate. This was second uncle's thick soil plate, which was refined by her father after he formed his gold core. Its power was extraordinary, but when they were escaping from Mount Yunwu, second uncle forcibly attacked, so this thick soil plate was already broken. She was even more certain that this was just a copy of a character based on her impression. However, this formation could actually copy a character from one's imagination, and it could even transform into an artifact. It was quite amazing. Looking at that flying sword just now, its power was probably real. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead, but she didn't even have time to wipe it away. With a wave of her hand, she summoned the shuttle of soaring Apsara. If this second uncle's illusion really had the same power as when he was alive, she was afraid that she would be killed on the spot if she was not careful. The jade plate floated in the air. Yi Zhang's face was expressionless as he formed hand seals and muttered incantations. Streams of spiritual energy continuously struck the jade plate, causing it to swell up like a mat. Nevertheless, Emo Chinga knew this thick soil plate's weakness. This thing was called thick soil, so it naturally had the earth attribute. The earth was thick and solid. If she waited until the spiritual energy was completely injected, this jade plate would directly smash down with enough power to make her suffer. However, this thing needed time to increase its power. If she attacked first and seized the initiative, she could restrain it. Immediately, the shuttle of soaring Apsara turned into a golden net and flew directly towards this illusion. Ah! The golden net firmly stabbed into the illusion, causing it to let out a blood-curdling scream. Emo Chinga's hands couldn't help but tremble when she saw second uncle's pained expression. Once she moved, she discovered that this illusion didn't have the reaction speed of a real person, but it was too similar. She clearly knew the second uncle in front of her was fake, but he looked so similar that she almost couldn't bear to attack him. All of a sudden, a malicious glint flashed in the illusion's eyes. He pointed his finger, causing the enlarged thick soil plate to suddenly smash down on her. Emo Chinga's figure flashed. In an instant she was already several dozen feet away. She clasped her hands together and heard another painful scream. The golden light broke through the illusion's body, and the second uncle in front of her gradually faded away. The thick soil plate also broke inch by inch and disappeared. Emo Chinga wiped the sweat on her face and slowly calmed down. A fake was a fake after all. Second uncle wouldn't look at her like that, and he also wouldn't attack her. She turned around and took 2 steps, but she was stunned again. A person stood several dozen feet away from her. He had handsome eyebrows and a gloomy expression. It was Qin Shi. Emo Chenga instantly released the shuttle of soaring Apsara. However, unlike second uncle, this Qin Shi illusion didn't react to her attack. Instead, he raised his hand, causing the golden light to converge and transform into the shuttle of soaring Apsara again. He caught it in his hand. Emo Chenga was shocked. Ever since she obtained the shuttle of soaring Apsara, she knew the power of this thing. When scattered, it could form a formation. When gathered, it could form a needle. It had form but no substance, and it could kill people without leaving a trace. She grasped the formation to control this thing and refined it for a long time, so how could it be easily taken away by someone? But this was just a fleeting thought. Now wasn't the time to think about this matter. She fumbled in her Qingquan bag and took out a flying sword and several small flying daggers. The flying daggers were originally the iron-teethed crocodile's fangs. After she built her foundation, she refined them into magic tools in Shenqing School's tool refining shop. Although they weren't very powerful, they were good for sneak attacks. The flying sword faced the enemy head-on while the flying daggers launched a sneak attack from behind. Qin Shi didn't use the shuttle of soaring Apsara. Instead he took out a sword. It was the sword with an astonishing momentum she once saw. The sword was golden in color and was covered in pulsating flames. The sword lightly swung, knocking her flying sword down. Then it flicked again, knocking all the flying daggers away. Emo Chenga was stunned. Although she still had magic tools on her, she hadn't refined them yet. Right now, she could only hurriedly take out several defensive talismans and put them on her body. She also took out a wind spell talisman and threw it out. By the time she finished doing all these, Qin Shi's sword had already arrived. In an instant it split into 2 into 4 into 8, all of which directly attacked Emo Chenga from different directions. Emo Chenga simply didn't have enough time to react. She could only watch helplessly as the sword pierced her body. However, she didn't feel the pain she expected. Instead, her body felt lighter, and the sword's might vanished in a flash. The Qin Shi in front of her also gradually dissipated, and the shuttle of soaring Apsara fell. Emo Chenga was still in a state of shock. After thinking for a moment, she understood. The person was fake, and the surrounding environment was also fake, so the attack was also fake. It was just an illusion created by relying on spiritual aura fluctuations. She made up her mind and retrieved her flying sword, shuttle of soaring Apsara, and other things. She then sat down cross-legged and slowly recovered her spiritual aura. At this moment, a person once again appeared in front of her. It was the already dead Su Jingji. She didn't know who killed Su Jingji in the fight for the foundation building pill. After that, she was faced with a lot of problems, so she never thought about him again. Now that she saw Su Jingji, she couldn't help but feel her heart fluctuate. However, a moment later she adjusted her state of mind. She closed her eyes and concentrated on adjusting her breath. She sensed Su Jingji's talisman flying towards her, but she didn't move. She was already in the foundation building realm now, so Su Jingji's attack was very weak. The moment the talisman came into contact with her body, it swayed and disappeared along with Su Jingji. After that, Murong Yen, senior martial brother Zhou Luo Fengxue, and the others appeared one by one. Since Emo Chenga had already comprehended the mystery behind the talisman, she just pretended she didn't see anything and sat in meditation in silence. When she opened her eyes again, the scenery in front of her was no longer the indistinct sea of fog and clouds. Instead, it was a vast expanse of yellow sand and the scorching sun. Emo Chenga pondered for a moment, then stood up and looked around. Boundless yellow sand, the sun hanging high in the sky, and the fierce wind, it looked very much like the desert in the west of the celestial pole. She once again released her divine sense, but she discovered that it spread out without any hindrance. Feeling this, Emo Chenga was pleasantly surprised. She immediately closed her eyes and concentrated on exploring with her divine sense. Soon a smile appeared on her face. The eye of the formation. She found the eye of the formation. After carefully sensing her surroundings, Emo Chenga opened her eyes and judged her direction. According to her divine sense, the eye of the formation was located about half a mile away. This distance was very reasonable. If she could reach the eye of the formation, she should be able to escape. The yellow sand under her feet was extremely soft. When she stepped on it, it sank up to her knees. Like walking on snow, every step was extremely difficult. She originally wanted to fly, but she discovered she couldn't fly in this place. She could only calm down and move forward one step at a time. The wind blew up the yellow sand, making whooshing sounds and fiercely hitting her face, making her feel extremely painful. The scorching sun shone on her body, making her feel like her whole body was burning. Emochinga was stunned when she sensed this. She was already a foundation-building cultivator now, so she was immune to heat and cold. Why did she feel uncomfortable being shone by the sun and hurt being hit by the gale? Realizing this problem, she immediately wanted to move the spiritual aura in her body to arrange a defensive barrier around her. However, she was stunned. Her body was completely empty. Whether it was her dantian or meridians, there was no spiritual aura at all. After standing for a while, Emochinga's face was covered in sweat. This formation actually turned her into a mortal. She wiped the sweat from her face and put her hand into her chenkuan bag. It was useless. Opening the chenkuan bag required a bit of spiritual aura, but now she didn't even have this bit of spiritual aura. She couldn't use her chenkuan bag, she had nothing on her body, and she had no spiritual aura, so she couldn't cast a single spell. Now she could only use her divine sense. However, her soul-refining technique hadn't reached its peak yet, so it was useless. After thinking for a while, she calmed down and continued to walk step by step towards the eye of the formation. In any case, if she found the eye of the formation, there would definitely be a turning point. After walking for a while with her head down, Emochinga turned around and saw that the sand and wind had gradually covered her footprints in the direction she came from. She closed her eyes again to sense her position, but what she saw shocked her once again. The distance of that position didn't change at all. She thought quickly. Could it be that she didn't go out at all? But the footprints were real. Then could it be that the position changed? Thinking of this, her face couldn't help but turn pale. If that was the case, she didn't have the ability to resist at all. Calm down, Emochinga muttered in her heart. She then took a deep breath and began to think from the beginning. This formation was obviously an illusory formation, but it was a fact that she had no spiritual aura right now. How could she break this formation? There was no killing intent around her. The scorching sun, the yellow sand, and the gale were a kind of torment. This was either a trap or a test of her willpower. After thinking for a while, she clenched her teeth and continued to walk forward. If she didn't move, it would be a trap, but if she moved, she might have a chance to survive. Step by step, she didn't know how long she had been walking. Her vision started to blur, but her willpower remained firm and she clenched her teeth. Her hands were so sore that she almost couldn't lift her legs. The wind became stronger and the sun became hotter. Finally, her body went limp. She fell to the ground and passed out. After a long time, the sky seemed to be torn apart. A crack appeared, and a man wearing a Taoist robe floated in from the outside. He muttered in a low voice, "The little girl isn't bad. She actually persisted for this long. Aling, for your sake, I won't make things difficult for her." Chapter 112. It was dark in front of her. Her primordial spirit was sleeping in her Dantian sea of consciousness. Emochinga vaguely heard some voices. "Aling, does this little girl really have your spiritual roots of the origin?" It was a man's voice. It was deep, clear, and very pleasing to the ear. It sounded like he wasn't very old. "Haven't you seen it yourself? Why are you asking me?" This voice was clearer and sharper. It should belong to a younger man. He sounded a bit impatient. Hearing this, the first person said, "I'm just asking." The man called Aling let out a humph. Right after that, Emochinga felt a powerful force rushing into her meridians. She couldn't help but moan, not because of pain but because of numbness. This force was extremely powerful. When it rushed into her meridians, she felt like her meridians were no longer under her control. However, this force was warm and made her feel very comfortable. Spiritual roots of the origin, pure in constitution. "Alas, I don't know if I should say she's lucky or unlucky," Aling muttered. "What do you mean by lucky and unlucky?" The first man was curious. Aling answered, "You should know the cultivation method of spiritual roots of the origin. There are only two words, balance and permanence. The whole body is regarded as a universe. The 5 elements generate each other, and yin and yang balance each other. However, people with pure yin constitution have yin and no yang in their bodies. Solitary yin doesn't grow and solitary yang doesn't grow. So this little girl's spiritual roots of the origin won't have any benefits? That's not true. Pure yin is also divided into 5 elements. She can completely cultivate the balance of the 5 elements of pure yin first before considering other things. You want to teach her the art of the origin? Since she's my descendant, I should take care of her. Besides, she has my spiritual roots of the origin. How can I just ignore her?" I'm afraid it's because of your incomparably charming Miss Yaoqing, right? Hearing such sour words, Aling was furious. In any case, she left behind my bloodline. Can you give me a child? If you can give me a child, I'll immediately throw this girl out. Ah. The man begged for mercy. I was just saying. Don't be angry, After a moment of silence, Aling said, her foundation in the art of Sunu is quite good, it'd be a pity to cripple it. If she switched to cultivating my Taiyuan record now, it'd be very difficult for her to achieve the desired cultivation effect. Alas, if she performed dual cultivation with a man with a pure yang constitution, she'd be able to artificially create a yin and yang balance. As soon as he said that, the man immediately shouted, "Don't look at me. I didn't even like your Miss Yaoqing back then, let alone this little girl who's still wet behind the ears. Besides, I don't even know which generation this girl is your descendant. This is too unethical." Aling was furious again. Get lost. Do you think there's no one else with a pure yang constitution besides you? What kind of filthy things are in his head? Mo Chenga wanted to wake up, but her primordial spirit seemed to be extremely exhausted. Not only did it have no reaction at all, but her remaining consciousness was also fuzzy. In the end, she once again passed out. When she finally regained consciousness, she abruptly sat up. What she saw was a small wooden hut with a wooden bed, a wooden cabinet, a bamboo chair and a bamboo cup. She didn't know what kind of spiritual plant it was, but it was full of spiritual aura, almost visible to the naked eye. Not only that, but the surrounding spiritual aura was several times denser than in her immortal's cave on Mount Taikang. What kind of place was this? She looked down and found that her body was intact. Even the burn on her back from fighting demonic beasts was no longer painful. The spiritual aura in her body not only recovered, but also seemed to be a bit stronger. She suddenly remembered the two voices she heard when she was in a daze. Aling, spiritual root of the origin, Yaoqing, and descendant. When these words were connected, the answer was obvious. The Mo family's ancestor was the other ancestor Mo Yaoqing mentioned. Mo Chenga held her head, wondering if it was just a dream. Mo Yaoqing said she was a person from thousands of years ago who eventually died of old age. Mo Yaoqing herself was a nascent soul cultivator, and these two people were also nascent soul cultivators. It was impossible for them to live thousands of years longer than Mo Yaoqing. Or, were they ghosts? Or were they unknown existences? She patted her head, got out of bed, pushed the door open, and slowly walked out of the small room. In the distance, there were green mountains, the fragrance of flowers, several wooden houses, a pond and two men. It was a picturesque scene. While she was still in a daze, the two men sitting under the tree playing chess turned their heads. "Little girl, you're awake? Come and sit." Mo Chenga looked over. The one talking to her was a handsome man in a Taoist robe. He was currently holding a chess piece with a smile on his face. The person sitting opposite him was also a young man, but he looked a bit younger. His face still retained the sharpness and elegance of a youth. At first glance, she only felt that these two people were as deep as the sea. They didn't reveal anything and she couldn't tell what realm their cultivation levels were. However, this kind of momentum meant they must be senior experts, so she didn't dare to be frivolous. She approached them in a well-behaved manner and saluted them. Junior Mo Chenga greets the two seniors. Mo Chenga? The man who spoke before turned his head and looked at the young man opposite him. You're really surnamed Mo. It seems you're undoubtedly Miss Yaoqing's descendant. Upon hearing their conversation, Mo Chenga knew the conversation she heard while she was in a daze wasn't a dream. She immediately looked at the other young man. Was this person Aling, the other ancestor Mo Yaoqing mentioned? The young man looked pensive. After staring at her for a long time, he finally said, "Junior, tell me about your background." When Mo Chenga heard his voice, it was indeed exactly the same as Aling. Too many thoughts flashed through her mind, but she only thought about it for a moment before she said, "Junior's ancestor indeed has a person named Yaoqing. May I ask if Senior is this another ancestor of mine?" The two people glanced at each other. The young man said slowly, "As soon as you entered the illusory sky formation, I knew you were my descendant. You have an ancestor named Mo Yaoqing, that's right." Mo Chenga's mood surged when she heard the confirmation. She brushed her clothes and knelt down. Mo Chenga greets Senior Great Ancestor. Junior didn't know and couldn't salute. "Please forgive me, Great Ancestor. May I ask Great Ancestor's name?" The young man showed a faint smile. He gently flicked his sleeve and a powerful force lifted her up. "My name is Zhong Muling and my Taoist name is Chiliang. I'm your ancestor, so I have no qualms accepting your kneeling. However, I've never taken care of you, so you don't have to be so polite. Once Zhong Muling finished speaking, the man opposite him smiled and said, "Little girl, you're quite polite." Mo Chinga then turned around and asked, "May I ask how I should address you, senior?" The man answered, "My name is Yuan Bao. You can call me by my full name. Don't call me Senior Yuan." "So it's Senior Yuan Bao. Since you're someone close to my great ancestor, you're also Junior's senior." Mo Chinga bowed deeply. Her behavior left a good impression on Yuan Bao. He smiled and said, "That'll do. You're Aling's descendant, so you naturally have your own benefits. You don't have to be so polite. Sit." Mo Chinga turned to look at Zhong Muling. Seeing him nodding slightly, she finally sat down on another stone bench. A shocking thought appeared in her mind, and it was most likely true. Mo Yaoqing passed away several thousand years ago with her nascent soul cultivation level. These two people lived at the same time, but they lived until now, so their cultivation levels were most likely above the nascent soul realm. That was the deification realm. Yuan Bao stared at her, then said to Zhong Muling with a smile, "This little girl is very smart. It seems she already knows our cultivation levels." Zhong Muling raised the corners of his lips and nodded with satisfaction. "You're my descendant, so how can you be too stupid? Girl, I've been away from the secular world for many years. I occasionally go back, so I know you have a Mo family's village now. It's just that you're too young, so I didn't see it last time. I didn't expect there to be a descendant with spiritual roots in these past few decades who even set foot on the path of cultivation. You're in your 20s now? Judging from your clothes, you seem to have entered Xianqing school? This ancestor has actually been taking care of the Mo family?" A thought flashed through Mo Chinga's mind. She answered cautiously, "Great ancestor, I'm in my 20s now. I'm indeed a disciple of Xianqing school." "Your art of Sunu was passed down by Mo Yaoqing? Tell me, how did you set foot on the path to immortality?" Mo Chinga felt strange listening to Zhong Muling's words. According to his conversation with Yuan Bao and the words Mo Yaoqing left in her mind years ago, the two of them should be husband and wife. How could he mention Mo Yaoqing in such a relaxed and distant manner as if they didn't have any feelings between husband and wife? She didn't ask this question and just answered first, "Yes. When I was a child, I accidentally entered the Mo family's ancestral hall. I triggered the restriction and obtained the art of Sunu's inheritance." She told him everything from when she was 7 years old, how she started cultivating, how she was deceived, how she went to Kunwu, how she wandered with second uncle, how she entered Yunwu sect, how her second uncle passed away, how she went to Xianqing school, how she built her foundation, the demonic beast riot. When she finally finished talking, both Zhong Muling and Yuan Bao's expressions darkened. "How can I, Zhong Muling, allow my descendant to be bullied?" After a long time, Zhong Muling finally said this. He then turned to Mo Chinga and said, "Take out the jade pendant that conceals your physique." Mo Chinga answered. She then reached for the jade pendant around her neck, untied it, and handed it over to Yuan Bao. "Oh, this is an excellent spirit-concealing pendant." Taoist Yuan Bao was surprised. Zhong Muling nodded. "It's really not easy for a core formation cultivator to refine this kind of magic weapon. I actually remember that brat who was trapped in the illusory sky formation a few days ago." "Right. That person was also wearing Xianqing School's uniform, so he must have been Qin Shoujing. He's only 140 years old, but he's already in the middle stage of the core formation realm. Back then, although I also formed my gold core within 100 years, my talent was much higher than his." Zhong Muling said, "He's different from you. That brat has a yang spiritual bead inside his body, and he's completely unaffected by this illusory sky formation. It's clear that his willpower is strong. If his cultivation speed isn't fast, there would be no justice in this world." Yang spiritual bead. Zhong Muling suddenly changed the topic and looked at Yuan Bao. Both of them had thoughtful expressions on their faces. Mo Chinga still couldn't understand what they were talking about. She only heard from their conversation that they seemed to have met martial uncle Shoujing, so she asked cautiously, "Great ancestor, Senior Yuan Bao, have you met martial uncle Shoujing? Is he all right?" Zhong Muling turned around and nodded at her. "That youngster should be the martial uncle Shoujing you mentioned. About half a month ago he accidentally broke into the illusory sky formation and was injured. However, he finished healing his injuries a few days ago and left." At this point he suddenly said with some anger, "He actually thought the illusory sky formation was a place to heal his injuries." Yuan Bao smiled. "That's because he's brave and thought we didn't have any bad intentions. Martial uncle Shoujing was indeed all right. Mo Chinga hesitated for a moment then asked, "Then, was there a youngster beside him who looked a bit like him? Around 20 years old, early stage foundation building realm?" "I didn't see him." Zhong Muling didn't even think about it. He immediately shook his head and denied it. "That'll do. Go write your art of Sunu first and let me watch. Leave this spirit concealing pendant with me first. I'll see if I can refine it again." Chapter 113. Mo Chinga finished cultivating in her great circulatory cycle and opened her eyes. Cultivating here, she found that her cultivation progress was unbelievably fast. She had 5 spiritual roots, so it wasn't easy for her to retain spiritual aura in her body. However, in this place the 5 spiritual roots were circulating, so her spiritual aura absorption speed was several times faster than on Mount Taikang. Normally, the density of spiritual aura would affect the speed of spiritual aura absorption, but her spiritual roots were too poor. Her absorption speed was at most 1 or 2 times faster, never 4 or 5 times faster. Moreover, ever since she entered the foundation building realm, her cultivation level had been stagnant for the past 6 months. In the past 2 days, however, her cultivation level rose very quickly. Since she handed over the art of Sunu, Zhong Muling had been studying it in seclusion. The other master of this place, Yuan Bao, was very kind. After talking to her a lot, she finally learned the reason. As it turned out, this place was called the Virtual Sky World. It was said to be an independent space created by someone with great divine power in the distant past era. There was light and water inside, and it was self-sustaining. Others couldn't enter without permission. In other words, the master of this place was a god. In the distant past era, this virtual sky world was also a magical object. Only people with great divine power could possess it. In today's world, it was even more of a heaven-defying object. The spiritual aura here was the same as in the distant past era, so the cultivation speed here was extremely fast. Zhong Muling obtained this object by chance. Mo Chinga was quite envious of this. A portable immortal's cave with such dense spiritual aura was very safe and convenient to hide. It was truly a first-class weapon for killing and escaping. She was even more envious when she learned that after reaching the deification realm, its master could make it fly like a magic weapon. Nevertheless, she also knew this thing was extraordinary. For deification realm experts like them, this thing was also a heaven-defying treasure. Taoist Yuan Bao also said that as far as they knew, aside from them, there was only one other deification realm cultivator who had a virtual sky world, so Mo Chinga was just thinking about it. Mo Chinga was very curious about this senior Yuan Bao. He seemed to have never met an outsider for many years, so he talked with her in high spirits, allowing her to understand a lot of things. As it turned out, this great ancestor of hers, Zhong Muling, not only had the spiritual roots of the origin, but his yin and yang were also exactly half. He had the purest neutral body, and his blood was also known as the blood of origin of heaven. This heavenly origin blood could only be obtained by those with a neutral primordial epic spirit root. It was an excellent primer for alchemy. When Zhong Muling was young, he entered a cultivation group that specialized in concocting pills. His master treated him very well, so he never knew he had a special constitution. Later, when his master passed away and he was imprisoned by his martial uncle, he finally realized he wasn't immortal. Later on, when he escaped from the sect, he experienced many things and stumbled along until he reached the core formation stage. Only then did his situation improve a bit. After that, with the miraculous effects of the art of origin and the blood of heaven's origin, he entered the soul formation stage in one go and never entered the world again. When Mo Chinga heard this, she felt a bit closer to this ancestor. She herself has the constitution of purine, so she has always been very careful. She is inevitably depressed because of this. It turns out that this ancestor also has the same troubles. Since he can cultivate to the divinity realm in the same environment, she is very confident that with the method of the origin she can also do it. As for Taoist Yuan Bao, his experience was much simpler. He was born in a big cultivation family and was in a big cultivation group. He had a constitution of pure yang and a single spiritual root. Ever since he was a child, he was pampered by his sect and family. In addition, he himself was pure, so he cultivated until he reached the nascent soul realm. Later on, he broke through and entered the soul formation realm. Soul formation cultivators are indifferent to everything in the secular world. Moreover, when his relatives and friends passed away one by one, he felt bored, so he left his family and cultivation group. Yuan Bao spoke calmly, but Mo Chinga was very jealous. Although Zhong Muling was also a genius in the distant past era, he also experienced a lot of hardships to achieve what he had. Yuan Bao, on the other hand, was a genius since he was a child and was carefully cultivated by his family and cultivation group. His cultivation path was too smooth, so smooth that she, who was born with hardships, was jealous. She couldn't help but wonder if Zhong Muling's bad attitude toward Yuan Bao was also because of this. Yuan Bao met Zhong Muling when he reached the peak of the nascent soul realm and tried to enter the soul formation realm. In order to enter the soul formation realm, Yuan Bao had lived in his family and cultivation group since he was a child, so he didn't understand the world at all. Because of this, he left his family and cultivation group and wandered around the world. One day he was very bored and squatting in a cultivation market square. When he saw Zhong Muling walking back and forth in front of him, he got excited and followed him, wanting to tease him. Just like that, they got to know each other. Originally, the two of them were just seniors teasing juniors. Who would have thought that Zhong Muling would also enter the soul formation realm? Only then did they become good friends. Cultivation in this world wasn't easy, and there were only a few soul formation realm cultivators. Only the two of them were similar in age, so they lived in seclusion together for several thousand years. Speaking of this, Yuan Bao's eyes looked quite lonely. He seemed to be very happy to have someone to accompany him, causing Mo Chenga to sigh inwardly. They also didn't know how long a soul formation realm cultivator's lifespan was. After several thousand years, they still didn't know the end of their lifespan. Hearing Yuan Bao's words, such a simple-minded person actually felt lonely. Mo Chenga couldn't help but think, wasn't the purpose of cultivation to live forever? If he still felt lonely and sad in the end, why would he want to live forever? Yuan Bao said with a smile. Although living forever was lonely, there were many beautiful things that he had to experience while alive. Therefore, if he had to choose, he would still walk on the path of cultivation and walk on the path of immortality. Otherwise, after several decades of life, some things would end before he could understand them. That would be too short. Besides, there were always ways to relieve loneliness. If he died, he wouldn't be able to experience anything. In addition, Yuan Bao also told her about Mo Yaoqing. It turned out her feeling wasn't wrong. Between Mo Yaoqing and Zhong Muling, there was only the matter between husband and wife, but there was no love between husband and wife. In the past, Mo Yaoqing plotted against Zhong Muling in order to advance to the nascent soul realm, which was why they had the fate of dual cultivation. Because of some reasons, Zhong Muling really wanted to have children. Mo Yaoqing also helped him in other matters, so he didn't care about this matter. Later, when he reached the deification realm, he found out that after one night of being husband and wife, Mo Yaoqing actually gave birth to children. However, Mo Yaoqing had already passed away. He was happy and also a bit grateful to Mo Yaoqing, so he decided to travel the world in the virtual sky world. If he reached the celestial pole, he would visit his descendants. Mo Chenga felt a bit relieved when she thought about this. Zhong Muling wanted to have children. Although his descendants had the surname Mo, he always looked after them, so he would definitely take care of her. Just as she was thinking, a voice suddenly rang in her ears. "Chenga, come to my room." It was Zhong Muling's voice. Mo Chenga stood up and straightened her clothes. Knowing that the master of this room was her ancestor, she was naturally ecstatic. However, since she started cultivating, she had experienced too many things, so her mind was very calm, so she soon calmed down. Her spiritual roots of the origin were inherited from this great ancestor. For the sake of this rare spiritual root, this great ancestor was very kind to her and previously revealed his intention to give her a cultivation technique. She didn't want more than that. As long as she could get a suitable cultivation technique, she would be satisfied. "Greetings, great ancestor." Zhong Muling sat cross-legged on the praying mat and pointed at the opposite side of him. When she sat down, he said amiably, "Do you know what's so special about spiritual roots of the origin?" Mo Chenga answered, "Junior only knows that spiritual roots of the origin are one of several special spiritual roots, but I don't know its real use." Zhong Muling smiled. He wasn't surprised by this answer. Very few people knew about the special characteristics of spiritual roots of the origin. The so-called origin is the origin of primordial chaos. At the beginning of the world was chaotic. The five elements were born, and yin and yang began to grow. Thus, a world where the five elements reinforced and restrained each other, and yin and yang cycled back and forth, growing and multiplying endlessly. Spiritual roots of the origin refer to spiritual roots of the five elements that have the same strength and can achieve a balance inside the body. Do you understand now that I put it this way? Mo Chenga was a bit shocked. The so-called primordial chaos was the origin of the world. Spiritual roots of the origin could actually be explained in this way? She calmed herself down and pondered for a moment, then said slowly, Great ancestor, do you mean that spiritual roots of the origin are used to cultivate a world of primordial chaos? Zhong Muling nodded. Correct. This is a cultivation technique from the distant past era. Later on it was gradually lost. I dare say that aside from me, no one else knows this cultivation method. I see. She never thought that spiritual roots of the origin would actually be related to the distant past era. In other words, her spiritual roots were actually excellent? I also obtained this cultivation technique by accident. Otherwise I'd also have 5 spiritual roots. Since I don't have your pure Yin constitution, I'd only have a waste spiritual root. Your pure Yin constitution is actually not suitable for cultivating spiritual roots of the origin. You must know that the elements of primordial chaos include the 5 elements in Yin and Yang. In the past, I happened to have a balanced body of Yin and Yang, so my cultivation speed was very fast. You, on the other hand, have a solitary Yin that doesn't grow and a solitary Yang that doesn't grow. Hearing Zhong Muling's words, Mo Chinga's heart suddenly became cold. She just had hope for her innate talent, but she was actually happy for nothing? Upon seeing her expression, Zhong Muling once again smiled and said, Pure Yin constitution and spiritual roots of the origin. It's originally very hard to obtain even one of them. Now that you've obtained both, you'll have to give a discount. However, you don't need to be depressed. Pure Yin constitution has other benefits. It's not like you can't cultivate the art of the origin. Yin and Yang both have 5 elements, so you can cultivate the 5 elements of Yin first. In the past 2 days I've carefully studied your art of Sunu and modified it a bit. I added the cultivation method of the art of the origin. From now on, let's call it the Sunu art of the origin. Zhong Muling pointed at the 2 jade slips on the table. This is my original art of the origin Taiyuan record. This is the Sunu art of the origin I modified. I gave this Taiyuan record to you because I don't have a pure Yin constitution. This Sunu art of the origin was derived from my deduction. If this cultivation technique isn't to your liking, you can just recultivate this Taiyuan record. Hearing this, Mo Chenga was somewhat overwhelmed by the favor. She originally thought Zhong Muling being willing to modify her cultivation technique was already very good. She didn't expect he would directly give her the art of the origin and even say such things. Great ancestor, Zhong Muling pondered for a moment, then said, although you're my descendant, I can't keep you in this virtual sky world. This virtual sky world is a space from the distant past era. Cultivating here will naturally be very fast, but without worldly experience your mental state will certainly be lacking. At that time, making a realm breakthrough will become a problem. Now that you're an elite disciple of a famous cultivation group and have a promising future, I won't keep you here. You can stay here for a while and practice this Sunu art of the origin to see if it's feasible. When the time comes, I'll give you several treasures as a token of our blood ties. Yes, Mo Chenga answered. She didn't have any delusions about staying here. After all, several thousand years had passed, and the blood ties between her and this great ancestor were very faint. It was already very good that he was willing to take care of her. Seeing how obedient she was, Zhong Muling seemed to feel a bit sorry for her. He said, during this time if you have any problems you can ask me. Although I won't do everything for you, I won't let you be bullied by others. Chapter 114. Time is constant, space is balance. Heaven and earth are divided into Yin and Yang, containing the 5 elements. Metal gives birth to water, water gives birth to wood, wood gives birth to fire, fire gives birth to metal. Metal subdues wood, wood subdues earth, earth subdues water, water subdues fire, and fire subdues metal. Metal is Yin, so it's sharp. Metal is Yang, so it gathers thunder, so it's lead. Wood is Yin, so it's spirit. Wood is Yang, so it drives away evil, so it's break. Water is Yin, so it's crystallized. Water is Yang, so it's illusionary. Fire is Yin, so it gathers souls, so it's dark. Fire is Yang, so it's immortal, so it's nirvana. Earth is Yin, so it's immortal. Earth is Yang, so it's firm, so it's unbreakable. Opening Taiyuan record, she saw these words at the beginning. The origin was the origin of the primordial chaos. From the beginning of the world's creation, heaven and earth were chaotic. Until the beginning of the primordial world, the sun and moon were hidden, the 4 seasons changed, the world was balanced, and time became constant. This Taiyuan record revolved around the 2 words, constant. When she opened the Sunu art of the origin again, the words at the beginning had been replaced. She couldn't help but sigh as she read them one by one. 4 foundation building cultivators like her, deification cultivators, were really like celestial beings. Zhong Muling didn't have a pure Yin body. Just by examining the way the spiritual aura in her body worked, this Sunu art of the origin seemed to be created by her. Bit by bit, everything matched perfectly. At first glance, she felt like she was in a trance. After she finished memorizing the contents, she tried to cultivate in this small hut. Sitting cross-legged, she first moved her spiritual aura in a great circle before guiding it to slowly move along her meridians. Her spiritual aura had completely turned into Yin's spiritual aura. Right now, it flowed along her meridians, moving around according to the key points of the Sunu art of the origin. After the spiritual aura circled around her and returned to her dantian, it seemed to have triggered something. She suddenly felt her meridians contract, and she felt pain all over her body as countless spiritual aura suddenly poured into her. The spiritual aura in this virtual sky world was dense. In an instant, countless spiritual aura seemed to pour into her dantian. She knew this was normal, so she didn't panic. She slowly guided the spiritual aura into her meridians, little by little, into her own spiritual aura. Outside the house, under a tree, Zhong Muling and Yuan Bao were sitting across from each other. They were playing chess while chatting with each other. Yuan Bao watched as Zhong Muling glanced at the hut on the side from time to time. He joked, "Do you have to be like this? If there's a problem, we're all here. Do you think we can't save him?" Zhong Muling curled his lips. What problem could there be? I used the divination technique to derive this cultivation method, so it won't be a problem for her to cultivate to the nascent soul stage. Then what are you looking at? Ingot put down a chess piece and said indifferently, "This girl seems to have a good comprehension ability. In my opinion, we should just let her fend for herself. If she can't even comprehend the cultivation method, then there's no need to count on her." Zhong Muling glared at Mo Tienga and said, "She's just a foundation-building cultivator. Do you expect her to have our comprehension?" "I didn't say that," Yuan Bao said shamelessly. "I won't talk about myself, but before you reached the core formation realm, you didn't have any help. Now she's an elite disciple of a big cultivation group and has a master and elders. If she can't do that, then what's the point of training her? If you want to achieve something, you can't rely on your elders. You can't lack either of your aptitude or temperament. Otherwise, you'll also fall at the bottleneck of advancing to the next realm. Alas, I suffered a lot in the past." By the time he finished speaking, he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Relying on his good aptitude, he easily cultivated to the nascent soul realm, but he couldn't pass the deification realm. Although Mo Chenga's aptitude wasn't bad, her pure Yin constitution weakened her spiritual roots of the origin, so she was naturally inferior to Zhong Muling and him. Presumably, there would be many tests waiting for her in the future. Zhong Muling also fell silent upon hearing what Mo Chenga said. The two of them played chess in silence for a while. Yuan Bao said, "We've been in the celestial pole for some time. How about we go back to Yunzhong and take a look?" "Oh." Zhong Muling muttered to himself for a while, then said, "That's fine. If there's no problem with this girl's cultivation technique, we'll go back to Yunzhong and play with that old fellow Han Quan while we're at it." Upon hearing this name, Yuan Bao chuckled and said, "Good idea. That phoenix-feathered bird of his is about to shed its feathers. Let's go and fish for some benefits." You're the one who wants to fish for some benefits, right? That bird's feathers are useless to me." Don't be so direct. In any case, what's yours is mine and what's mine is also yours. We've known each other for so long, do we still need to divide it between us? Scram. Zhong Muling glared at him. "Which one of the things you live and use isn't mine? What kind of nice words are you saying?" "Oh, since you're unhappy, I won't say nice words. I'll just use it in the future." "You..." Zhong Muling made a grabbing motion with his hand. A square seal appeared in his hand. In an instant, it swelled to the size of a small mountain and smashed towards Yuan Bao. Yuan Bao's figure flashed and instantly appeared more than 300 meters away. With a loud rumble, the flower field nearby was smashed into pieces, but Yuan Bao wasn't harmed in the slightest. "I say..." Yuan Bao was about to speak when Zhong Muling waved his hand. The square seal was immediately pulled back by him and he once again smashed it towards Yuan Bao. Yuan Bao was greatly alarmed. He reached around his waist and a small square shield appeared in his hand. The shield expanded against the wind and managed to block the square seal. "I say..." While competing with Zhong Muling with spiritual power, Yuan Bao spoke with difficulty, "Aren't you afraid that the spiritual aura fluctuation is too big and that the little girl's cultivation will go awry and she'll be possessed by the devil?" Zhong Muling was startled. He immediately put away the square seal and moved, disappearing from where he stood. "Phew. Yuan Bao heaved a sigh of relief. He muttered to himself, this brat, his cultivation level is rising really fast. If I want to win against him now, I'll have to expend a lot of energy. Alas, sooner or later, I'll be surpassed by him. His tone was relaxed, completely devoid of the hardships he faced when he fought against Zhong Muling. The implication was that his cultivation level was much higher than Zhong Muling's. At this moment, inside the small room, Zhong Muling was frowning as if he had a headache. On the praying mat, Mo Chenga's body was crooked. She was already unconscious. How could a small foundation-building cultivator like her withstand the spiritual aura pressure from two deification cultivators? If it wasn't for her pure Yin constitution, her cultivation level would have been crippled already. Even her current situation wouldn't be much better. Although her cultivation level was still there, her spiritual aura was completely out of control under their spiritual aura pressure. Now, her meridians were completely destroyed and her dantian was also riddled with holes. This is troublesome. Zhong Muling pondered for a moment, then said to himself, consider yourself lucky. Now, I have to help you reconstruct your dantian and mend your meridians. I might as well use the 5-spirit fruit to help you change your tendons and cleanse your marrows. Mo Chenga naturally didn't know what the 5-spirit fruit was. It was a spiritual seed that grew at the beginning of the world. One tree was divided into 5 elements, and the 5 fruits formed a whole, so it was called the 5-spirit fruit. It took 10,000 years to germinate, 10,000 years to grow branches, 10,000 years to become a tree, 10,000 years to bloom, 10,000 years to bear fruit, and 50,000 years to grow a 5-spirit fruit. This fruit was hard to find even in the distant past era. Unfortunately, this virtual sky world simulated the spiritual aura environment of the distant past era. When he obtained this fruit, there were 2 5-spirit fruits growing inside it. Now one of them was already ripe. When Zhong Muling thought of this, his heart ached again. He hadn't even warmed up the 5-spirit fruit, but it was going to be used by someone first. It was all that birdman's fault. Unfortunately, that birdman's noisy voice once again entered his ears. Aling, someone entered the illusory sky formation again. Wei Jiaxi opened her eyes in a daze. The previous scene was still fresh in her mind. The 5 demonic beasts kept attacking her. Her water spirit flag was destroyed, and only a few of her other magic tools were left. She thought she was going to die for sure, but she didn't. There was nothing in front of her except the trees that kept moving backward. Moving backward? Startled, she raised her head and was instantly stunned. After a long time, she finally found her voice. Marshal. Marshal uncle. Qin, she nodded. Seeing that she was awake, he stopped and let go of her. For a moment, Wei Jiaxi didn't know what to feel. There was only one thought in her mind. Marshal uncle came to save me? Senior Marshal sister? Second Senior Marshal sister. Wei Jiaxi immediately straightened her expression. She turned her head and saw Luo Fengxue rushing over. Seeing that Luo Fengxue was safe and sound, Wei Jiaxi smiled through her tears. It's great that you're all right. Second Senior Marshal sister, I was scared to death. Fortunately, Marshal Uncle Shoujing was nearby. Before Wei Jiaxi could speak, Qin she faintly said, all right Fengxue. I'll take you back first. Luo Fengxue was stunned. She then said anxiously, but Marshal Uncle Tienga's gone. Qin she frowned. Luo Fengxue explained, we were originally with Tienga, but when I was talking to Senior Marshal sister just now, Tienga went to keep a lookout nearby. In the end, demonic beasts came. Senior Marshal sister told me to find Tienga and go back first, so I couldn't find her. Qin she recalled that when he felt the spiritual aura fluctuation, Luo Fengxue indeed shouted Tienga. He pondered for a moment, then waved his sleeve. A flying cloud appeared under their feet. You can't be so reckless in the future. I'll take you back first. What about Tienga? Luo Fengxue asked anxiously. This was a dense forest. If Tienga was left here alone, I'm afraid, Qin she said, I have my own plans for this matter. You don't need to worry about it. Okay. Luo Fengxue was startled but still answered. Marshal uncle has always been taking care of Tienga, so he probably won't ignore me, right? The flying cloud rose and rapidly flew towards Luoyan Cliff. A core formation cultivator's flying magic weapon was extremely fast. In just a moment they arrived at Luoyan Cliff. After putting Wei Jiaxi and Luo Fengxue down, Qin she said, you two can go back first. Fengxue, report to your master that I'm safe and sound. If I find Tienga, I'll come back. Marshal uncle, are you going to look for Tienga? Luo Fengxue hurriedly stepped forward. Qin she showed a faint smile. Don't worry. I'm fine now. You just need to tell your master. But, Luo Fengshui still wanted to say something, but Qin Shi had already used the flying cloud, turned around and left. She could only sigh. She was naturally worried about Tiange, but it wouldn't be good for martial uncle to leave just because of Tiange, right? Second senior martial sister? Upon seeing Wei Jiaxi's silent expression, Luo Fengshui cautiously called out to her. Wei Jiaxi glanced at her then shook her head. I'm fine. Luo Fengshui naturally didn't believe Wei Jiaxi when she said she was fine. She said sternly, second senior martial sister, no matter what, you mustn't go the wrong way again. Wei Jiaxi smiled faintly. I know what you want to say. Don't worry. She then turned around and walked towards the big tent without saying anything else. Luo Fengshui thought for a moment then followed her. Second senior martial sister, wait for me. Chapter 115. Qin Shi cautiously looked around. He only saw a vast ocean with surging clouds and surging winds. He stood on the ocean like duckweed in the wind. The surging spiritual aura scraped against his body, making him ache fiercely. He knew this was an extremely brilliant formation. The master of this place must be a nascent soul cultivator, so even his peak-fixing lamp couldn't detect any abnormalities. He also knew the master of this place didn't have any evil intentions. A few days ago he fought against a 7th-ranked demonic beast and spent a lot of effort to kill it. In the end he was injured and happened to enter this formation. During the days he was trapped in the formation, the master of this place didn't do anything to him. This formation was also a trapping formation, not a killing formation, so he simply steeled his heart and healed his injuries on the spot. When he healed, the master opened the formation and let him go. Maybe the master was tired of him, or maybe the master found him pleasing to the eye. However, he didn't have any evil intentions when he entered the formation unintentionally. Now that he wanted to break through the formation, this trapping formation might turn into a killing formation. Before he could figure out what to do, a flash of lightning flashed. Qin Shi's figure moved and he instantly dashed thousands of feet away. When he looked back he was instantly covered in cold sweat. The place where he originally stood had set off monstrous waves that collided with the lightning, creating an earth-shattering rumble. A part of his sleeve had already been burnt. Sure enough, it turned into a killing formation. When he entered this formation a few days ago, every day was an illusory formation and a bewildering formation, which couldn't cause him any real harm. But now if he was a little slower he might end up like this sleeve. After thinking for a while, Qin Shi closed his eyes and fully released his divine sense. There was an endless ocean. He sighed in disappointment and his eyes looked gloomy. Sure enough, this formation wasn't something he could break with his current ability. Who was the master of this place? It wasn't like he hadn't seen a nascent soul cultivator's formation before, and he even used the peak-fixing lamp to break a nascent soul cultivator's restriction. Facing a nascent soul expert, even if he didn't have the ability to fight back, he could at least do something. He never felt like he was being trampled on, like he didn't even have a chance to escape. He sighed softly, but a moment later he closed his eyes and condensed his spiritual aura. He summoned the 3-yang real fire sword from his dantian. Under the spell, the sword shone with dazzling golden light and raged like fire. This 3-yang real fire sword was his natal magic weapon. In one of his adventures in the past, he accidentally obtained a cultivation technique and the method to refine this sword. The two of them were originally a set. When he saw that the two of them combined, their power was astonishing. Moreover, they were compatible with his own spiritual roots, so he chose to make it his natal magic weapon. After forming his gold core, he went through many difficulties and used the golden essence true fire to refine it. As soon as this sword was born, the wind, clouds, and thunder rumbled. That year was also the time of the demonic beast riot. Relying on this sword, Mo Tiange, who had just formed his gold core, became famous in West Kunwu. He speculated that if he had enough spiritual energy, he might even be able to fight against a nascent soul cultivator. Now that he was inside this formation, he could feel the powerful strength of the master of this place. His cultivation level was only in the core formation realm, so he could only try his luck with the 3-yang real fire sword. Lightning flashed again, but Qin Shi didn't move. The 3-yang real fire sword floated in the air. With the support of his spiritual aura, it shone brightly. A bolt of lightning finally jumped down. He raised his hand, and the 3-yang real fire sword floated in the air and collided with the lightning. The sword shook, but it managed to withstand the impact. Upon seeing this scene, Qin Shi once again made a hand seal. The 3-yang real fire sword absorbed the lightning and stood still. On the contrary, the lightning gradually weakened. One bright, one dim. The fire became fiercer and the lightning gradually died out. By the time the lightning disappeared, the three-yang real fire sword was burning like a scorching sun. It was so bright that it couldn't be looked at directly. She made another hand seal, and a threatening momentum soared into the sky, almost tearing a hole in the sky. After an unknown amount of time, Shi's face gradually turned pale. His spiritual aura was almost exhausted, but he couldn't stop. Metal gave birth to lightning and fire restrained lightning. His three-yang real fire sword happened to have a metal body and a fire appearance, so he first used fire to resist it, then seized its power and used metal to support its momentum. This power didn't belong to him, so he could barely control it. If he stopped now, he would suffer a backlash. Such a powerful heavenly thunder, and he hadn't mastered his body-refining technique yet. If he fought it head-on, he would definitely die without a corpse. Aha, this brat isn't bad. He has my style in the past. At that moment, Ingot was talking to himself inside the virtual sky world. Not bad, not bad. A mere core formation cultivator actually dared to fight against the illusory sky formation by using the mutual restraint of the 5 elements. And since you're pleasing to the eye, I'll play with you. Right after he finished speaking, Ingot flicked his sleeve, and a crack immediately appeared in front of him. He then jumped into it. Right at this moment, Zhong Muling used both of his hands to support Wuxia, helping her to sit up so that she was sitting cross-legged. One of his hands formed a palm and slapped the top of her head while the other took out a jade box from inside his robe. Zhong Muling's palm emitted an incomparably pure spiritual aura. This spiritual aura was neither yin nor yang. It contained all 5 elements, but it didn't look like impure spiritual aura at all. It seemed to have formed a new kind of spiritual aura, clean, pure, and extremely gentle. This spiritual aura easily entered Wuxia's meridians and dantian, slowly merging with it. Wuxia's pale face gradually recovered. Under the nourishment of his spiritual aura, her vitality seemed to be rapidly restored, and her complexion became ruddy bit by bit. Seeing that she was gradually recovering, Zhong Muling flicked his other hand and opened the jade box, revealing a green branch inside. On the branch, there was a human-shaped fruit that was neither grass nor gold. It was said that after 1,000 years, ginseng could transform into a human form and become a ginseng baby. In fact, only immortal herbs could transform into human forms. In the cultivation world, ginseng was just an ordinary herb with immortal aura. There were countless spiritual herbs with more spiritual aura than ginseng. However, ginseng was the closest species to immortal herbs, so it could grow into a human form. This 5-spirit fruit was an immortal fruit. In the human world today, this kind of immortal root could no longer be found. Only virtual sky worlds, which simulated the primal chaos, could have some of them. However, there weren't many known virtual sky worlds, and he was the only one that had 5-spirit fruits. Zhong Muling picked up the 5-spirit fruit. When he thought about how he had only picked this fruit for a few days, an angry expression appeared on his face. But soon he calmed down. He was already a deification cultivator, so his state of mind had long been calm. Even though this matter made him angry, it only lasted for a moment. He used his spiritual aura to lift the 5-spirit fruit. Under the pure spiritual aura, the fruit slowly melted and turned into a transparent essence. He slowly lifted the essence and poured it into Wuxia's mouth. The essence of the 5-spirit fruit entered her body and slid down along her meridians. Wherever it went, her meridians were restored and slid down to her dantian. The damaged parts were repaired little by little. In the end, it completely immersed and merged with her dantian. After an unknown amount of time, Zhong Muling let go of her and said softly, "The 5-spirit body cultivator is impervious to devil aura. With your pure yin body and the 5-spirit fruit's reconstruction of your meridians, you won't suffer from cultivation deviation in the future aside from inner demons during realm breakthroughs. I've treated you fairly." After an unknown amount of time, Wuxia woke up from her coma. She had a strange dream. In the dream, she seemed to have returned to the beginning of the primal chaos, when heaven and earth were first created. She was surrounded by dense spiritual aura. She greedily absorbed the spiritual aura and swallowed spiritual plants one by one. Her dantian and meridians rapidly evolved and grew, and her cultivation level increased unbelievably fast. When she regained her senses, she saw a pool of blood in front of her. All right. She was cultivating when she suddenly felt a strong spiritual aura pressure. This spiritual aura pressure almost made her lose her ability to move in an instant. She lost control of her spiritual aura and it rushed everywhere in her meridians. She was terrified and wanted to stop cultivating, but the spiritual aura pressure pressed down on her again. Her whole body was in pain and she lost consciousness. Mo Chinga knew this was cultivation deviation. She couldn't help but feel strange. Martial Uncle Xianin said she had a pure yin constitution. If yin and yang didn't clash, it would be very difficult for her to suffer from cultivation deviation. What was this spiritual aura pressure that made her lose control of her spiritual aura without any ability to resist? However, she immediately thought of a more important matter. If she suffered from cultivation deviation, what about her cultivation level? She hastily sat cross-legged, but when she tried to operate her spiritual aura, she was stunned. Not only was her cultivation level fine, but it even entered the middle stage of the foundation building realm. After being stunned for a moment, Mo Chenga was ecstatic. It had been less than a year since she entered the foundation building realm. Before this, her cultivation level had stagnated. Let alone advancing, even the growth of her spiritual aura was so slow that she almost couldn't feel it. But now, she actually entered the middle stage of the foundation building realm. How could she not be ecstatic? Entering the middle stage of the foundation building realm in half a year was simply inconceivable. Even someone like Yi Jingwen who reached the middle stage of the foundation building realm at the age of 40 could be considered a genius. "You're awake?" A voice came into her ears. It was Zhong Muling talking to her using his divine sense. Mo Chenga had just entered the middle stage of the foundation building realm, so she knew it must be this great ancestor's doing. She felt even more grateful and answered respectfully, "Yes, great ancestor. And how's your situation?" Junior has entered the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Although Mo Chenga had a calm temperament, she was still very happy. Zhong Muling snorted softly then said, "That's not what I'm asking. Feel your meridians and dantian." Mo Chenga was startled. She immediately closed her eyes and operated her spiritual aura. Meridians. She didn't notice it before, but now she realized that her meridians seemed to have become elastic. No matter how much spiritual aura she operated, she didn't feel any pain. No matter how much she operated her spiritual aura, her meridians could completely accommodate it. As for her dantian, it seemed, no matter how much spiritual aura there was, it could accommodate it. 5 spirit fruit. Zhong Muling was still a bit indignant, but he calmly said to her, "I wasn't paying attention for a moment and forgot you were cultivating and couldn't be disturbed, so I caused you to have a cultivation deviation. I've already used the 5 spirit fruit to help you reconstruct your meridians, change your tendons and cleanse your marrows. In the future you'll never have a cultivation deviation again. Of course, that doesn't include the inner demon during your realm breakthrough." Never have a cultivation deviation? Mo Chenga regained her train of thought. She was even more ecstatic than before. This was much more difficult than the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Never have a cultivation deviation. Didn't that mean she didn't need to worry about cultivating the soul refining art? Junior doesn't know how to repay great ancestors' kindness. Zhong Muling said faintly, "I'm already a deification expert. In this human world, I'm almost like a god. Why would I expect you to repay me? Since you're my descendant, I'm naturally willing to take care of you." Yes, Junior has said too much. Junior will certainly cultivate diligently in the future and won't let great ancestor down. And there's another matter. When you had a cultivation deviation, that boy surnamed Qin broke into the illusory sky formation. He said he was looking for you. I saw he was quite courageous, so I let him stay. Do you want to meet him? Chapter 116. Deification Cultivators. Qin looked at the 2 men in front of him. He was more shocked than vigilant. Although he had heard from his master that soul formation stage cultivators did exist in this world, these old monsters had long gone into seclusion. No one had seen them for nearly 1,000 years. He didn't expect to see 2 of them at once. Zhong Muling looked up at him and narrowed his eyes. "Brat, I was in a good mood a few days ago and let you go. Why are you rushing into the formation today?" Qin quickly regained his composure and saluted him calmly. "Senior, please forgive me. Junior came to look for someone. I didn't intend to rush into the formation." "Looking for someone?" Yuan Bao looked at his clothes and asked, "Who are you looking for?" Qin answered respectfully, "Junior is a disciple of Xianqing school. I came to look for a fellow disciple and boldly entered the formation. Please forgive me, Senior." Yuan Bao and Zhong Muling looked at each other. They both understood what was going on. Zhong Muling had a good impression of this person who was willing to take the risk to rush into the formation for his descendant with a respectful attitude without the slightest hint of flattery. He said kindly, "There's someone, but I don't know if she's the one you're looking for. Tell me your name." Upon hearing what they said, Qin Shi knew Mo Tiange was most likely here. Since these two deification seniors were very friendly, he said bluntly, "The person Junior is looking for is called Mo Tiange. I wonder if she's the person Senior mentioned?" Zhong Muling raised the corner of his mouth and stared at him meaningfully. "What's your relationship? You're willing to take such a big risk to save her?" Qin Shi said, "Junior is her senior in the school, so I naturally tried my best to save her." Zhong Muling cast him a glance, then waved his hand. A golden sword flew from the sky and fell into his hand. Three-yang real fire sword. Someone actually refined it. Qin Shi was stunned. "Senior knows this sword?" Zhong Muling let out a soft, umph. With a wave of his hand, he threw the three-yang real fire sword to Mo Tiange. "I've seen it in an ancient cultivator's handwritten notes. You're actually quite lucky to actually obtain this kind of ancient magic weapon." On the side, Yuan Bao laughed and said, "Aling, compared to the yang spiritual bead in his body, this three-yang real fire sword is nothing. Tiske, a yang spiritual bead. I really don't know what kind of luck this brat has to actually obtain such a rare treasure. If I had a yang spiritual bead, how could I have been stuck at the threshold of the deification realm for so long back then?" As he spoke, he kept glancing at Qin Shi. Qin Shi felt goosebumps all over his body from the malicious gaze, but he also knew that in front of a deification cultivator, he was nothing more than an ant. With his current strength, he simply couldn't resist what the other party wanted to do, so he quickly calmed down. "Senior has good eyesight. I do have a yang spiritual bead on me. I obtained it by chance in the past. After so many years, I finally managed to fuse it for my own use." His calmness somewhat surprised Yuan Bao. He turned around and said to Zhong Muling with a smile, "Aling, his willpower is comparable to yours." Zhong Muling said faintly, "Don't think everyone is like you." Although the tone was light, there was a hint of disdain in it. How could Ingot not hear it? He immediately shouted, "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Zhong Muling didn't even move his eyebrows. Without waiting for Yuan Bao to refute, he turned towards Qin Shi and said, "Junior, for the sake of the three-yang real fire sword, if you walk out of this formation, I'll let you see the person you want to see." Right after he finished speaking, before Qin Shi could answer, Zhong Muling waved his hand and disappeared along with Yuan Bao. Qin Shi stared at the glaciers that filled the sky and frowned. Just as he was about to sigh, he suddenly clutched his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. She pushed the door open and saw the person sitting cross-legged on the ground. She was startled and said, "Senior Martial Brother Qin." She didn't know that Zhong Muling, who was paying attention to the movements in the small room, was frowning slightly. After being startled for a moment, she immediately rushed over. From Zhong Muling's tone, she originally thought the person who came was Martial Uncle Shoujing. She thought she could finally see Martial Uncle Shoujing, whom she'd only heard of but never met. Unexpectedly, it was actually Senior Martial Brother Qin. Seeing Qin, she made her feel both relieved and uneasy. She felt relieved because he was right in front of her, so his life wasn't in danger. However, she felt uneasy because his face was pale and his hands and feet were ice cold. It seemed like he couldn't hear her voice at all. His eyes were closed and he was motionless. It seemed like he was seriously injured. Mo Tiange approached him and touched his hand. Upon discovering that it was as cold as ice, she immediately called out, "Great Ancestor, what's wrong with Senior Martial Brother Qin?" After a moment of silence, Zhong Muling's voice rang out. "This brat's vitality was injured in the illusory sky formation. You don't need to worry. Both his metal and fire spiritual roots are yang, and he also has a yang spiritual bead in his body. Ice and snow can't hurt him. His meridians are just temporarily frozen. He'll wake up after a while." "Oh." Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief after hearing Zhong Muling's explanation. Seeing that Qin Shi didn't move, she thought for a moment, then sat down next to him. Right now, even Qin Shi's eyebrows were covered in a layer of frost. Mo Tiange guessed this was probably the effect of an ice and snow bewildering formation similar to the desert bewildering formation she encountered before. However, why was Senior Martial Brother Qin here? "Great Ancestor," she called out again. Zhong Muling answered. "Can you help Senior Martial Brother Qin?" Zhong Muling paused for a while, then said impatiently, "It's not that troublesome. He just needs to adjust his breathing for a while and he'll be fine." "But, shut up. It's noisy." Just squat down for me. Oh. Zhong Muling was obviously unhappy, so Mo Qianga didn't dare to say anything else. She just stood on the side and watched Qin Shi in silence. In the past few days she obtained too many fated chances, so she temporarily forgot about the outside world. Now that she saw Qin Shi, she couldn't help but recall what happened before she came here. How did Feng Shui and Senior Marshal Sister Wei go? Did they persuade Senior Marshal Sister Wei? What if they didn't? Are they safe? Qin Shi let his imagination run wild. After an unknown amount of time he suddenly moved. Mo Qianga hastily jumped up. Senior Marshal Brother Qin. Qin Shi moved his eyelids and slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was a joyful face smiling at him. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, you've finally woken up. Qin Shi closed his eyes again. When his breathing gradually calmed down, he opened his eyes and smiled. Qianga, are you all right? Seeing that the first thing he asked after waking up was her, Mo Qianga's heart skipped a beat. She smiled and said, I'm fine. How about you, Senior Marshal Brother Qin? I'm also fine. It's just a small injury. I'll go back and slowly recuperate. After looking around, Qin Shi stood up with some difficulty. This place is. With such dense spiritual aura, what kind of paradise was this? His own Immortal's Cave was located in the place with the densest spiritual aura on Clear Spring Peak. It also had a high-grade spirit gathering formation, but it was still much worse than this place. This is the Virtual Sky World. Virtual Sky World? Qin Shi frowned slightly, wondering where he heard this name. Mo Qianga immediately said, Senior Marshal Brother Qin, don't think too much. This is Senior Yuan Bao and my great ancestor's cave. Nothing will happen. Great ancestor? Yes. Mo Qianga nodded and said, I was also shocked when I first found out. My great ancestor's surname is Zhong, and his name is Mu Ling. He's also the master of this place. Could the master of this place be those two deification seniors? As he thought of this, Qin Shi's eyes were filled with surprise and confusion. Great ancestor was his grandfather's grandfather. However, cultivators had a long lifespan, and they didn't know how many generations their children and grandchildren had. Great ancestor could also refer to an ancestor whose seniority couldn't be called, but there was one thing that was correct. These two people were related by blood. Could it be that one of those two deification seniors was related by blood to her? As soon as this thought appeared, Qin Shi didn't know why, but he suddenly felt upset. Before he could figure out what was going on, he heard Mo Qianga say, I'll tell you about this in detail when we go back. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, are you really okay? Qin Shi smiled and said, I'm fine. Don't worry. I'll be fine after a few days of rest. What about you? Are you injured? Mo Qianga smiled and said, not only am I not injured, but I also obtained a lot of benefits. Mo Qianga released her aura and looked at him with a smile. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, look at me. What's different about me? Qin Shi sensed for a moment and was shocked. You advanced to the middle stage? Mo Qianga nodded happily. She didn't plan to tell him about the 5-spirit fruit, but she obtained the art of the origin and advanced to the middle stage. As long as she returned to Xianqing School, she definitely wouldn't be able to hide it, so she might as well tell him directly. She entered the middle stage of the foundation building realm less than a year ago. Although he had encountered a lot of fated chances, he was still quite surprised. However, when he thought of those two deification cultivators, he felt it was only natural. Qin Shi smiled and said, Congratulations, congratulations. You're already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm at such a young age. You can be considered the first person in Xianqing School. And if you work hard, you should have a good chance of forming your gold core within 100 years. Although I'm not sure I can build my foundation building realm, I'll still accept your auspicious words. After a pause, Mo Qianga remembered something. Right, Senior Marshal Brother Qin, did you come to see me? Qin Shi nodded. I heard you went missing here, so I came to see you. Really? Senior Marshal Brother Qin, didn't you go missing with Marshal Uncle Shoujing? What about Marshal Uncle Shoujing? Qin Shi paused for a moment then said, We're all fine, but you said this place is your great ancestor's Immortal's Cave. Is it one of those two seniors? Mo Qianga nodded then said apologetically, Senior Marshal Brother Qin, I'm really sorry. If I found out earlier, you wouldn't have been injured. It's nothing. Qin Shi shook his head faintly. I'm not injured, so you don't have to be like this. Right, what's your situation now? Since your great ancestor is a deification senior, should he stay here? Mo Qianga shook her head and said, Of course not. Right, Senior Marshal Brother Qin, you just woke up. Do you want to rest for a while? In any case, we still have time to talk. I'll go with you in a few days and then I'll slowly talk to you. Upon hearing this, Qin Shi smiled. His heart instantly calmed down and he said, that's fine. This place is full of spiritual aura, so we mustn't waste it. We'll slowly talk when we get back. And you can continue healing. I won't disturb you anymore. After watching Mo Tiange leave the room, Qin Shi sat down on the praying mat. Before he could heave a sigh of relief, a strong gust of wind suddenly hit him. He didn't have time to react at all, so the wind directly blew against his body. The spiritual aura inside his body suddenly surged uncontrollably, causing him to vomit another mouthful of blood. Zhong Muling's voice rang out inside the room. Why did you hide her identity? If you don't explain, don't blame me for taking your life. Chapter 117. When Mo Tiange walked out of the hut, she saw Zhong Muling standing by the pool with his hands clasped behind his back. It was unclear what he was thinking. She gently approached and greeted, Great Ancestor. After a long time, Zhong Muling finally moved. He glanced at her and said, You've stayed here for 7 days. It's time for you to leave. Mo Tiange nodded. Yes. Does Great Ancestor have any other instructions? You have your own opportunities. Why do you need me to instruct you? After saying that indifferently, Zhong Muling flicked his sleeve, causing a Qingquan bag to appear on the table under the tree. I've already refined your spirit-concealing pendant. With it, you can even pretend to be immortal. Thank you, Great Ancestor. Mo Tiange didn't try to be polite. Her breath-concealing technique wasn't very good, but with this thing, it would be much more convenient for her to do things in the future. However, there were still many things inside. Great Ancestor, then that purple wooden cauldron is the pill furnace I used in the past. It's no longer useful. Since you're practicing alchemy, I'll give it to you. That silk handkerchief is a defensive magic treasure that can also be used for flight. I have already recorded the incantation on the jade slip. You have to walk the path of cultivation on your own. This is all I can help you with. Whether or not you can reach core formation, nascent soul, or even soul formation all depends on your own ability. Mo Tiange put these things away. She knew her fate with this great ancestor was over. They were soul formation cultivators, and they would go into seclusion for hundreds of years. They might not even set foot in this place for 1,000 years. They might not even see each other again in the future. Alright, I'll send you off now. Yes. Zhong Muling raised his hand, causing a dot of light the size of a broad bean to appear between his eyebrows. He muttered an incantation, causing the light to become brighter and brighter. Gradually, it turned into a huge bead and fell on his hand. Mo Tiange furrowed her brows as she stared at the bead. She stared fixedly at it. Zhong Muling didn't stop chanting. In the end, he cast an incantation on the bead, tearing a crack in the air. Go. Mo Tiange was about to speak, but before she could say anything, she felt her vision darken and then brightened. She had already disappeared from the virtual sky world. Mo Tiange raised her head and looked around. This was a hilltop and there was nothing around her. They'd probably already left. She sighed. She still had questions to ask. Tiange? Oh. Upon hearing Qin Shi's voice, Mo Tiange turned her head around and was immediately gobsmacked. Qin Shi seemed to be a bit unsteady on his feet, and his complexion was ashen. Obviously, his injuries hadn't healed yet. She remembered that her great ancestor clearly said his injuries weren't a hindrance, so how could this be? Senior brother Qin, what's wrong? Qin Shi just propped himself up and shook his head. Let's go back first. After saying that, he didn't explain anything and summoned his flying sword, pulling her along as he flew towards Luoyan Cliff. Zhong Muling was meticulous. They were already far away from the forest. Qin Shi's expression was very solemn. Mo Tiange only took a few glances at him but didn't say anything. In just a moment, they arrived outside the Luoyan Cliff's array formation. Once they stopped, Qin Shi said, After you go back, don't tell anyone about this in detail. If someone asks, just tell them I told you not to. Oh, okay. Qin Shi seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything and just turned his head away. When Mo Tiange glanced at him, she saw a gloomy expression on his face. However, before she could say anything, the disciples in charge of patrolling came over. Soon after, the array was opened and they each went inside. After saying goodbye to Qin Shi, Mo Tiange seemed to be lost in thought. The scene of Zhong Muling opening the virtual sky world kept appearing in her mind. When she returned to the tent, she didn't know where Luo Fengxue went, but there was no one inside. She sat down in her seat and thought for a long time. Eventually, she reached into her Chengkuan bag and rummaged for a while before taking out an object. It was a bead the size of a baby's fist. It contained spiritual aura and was very similar to the one Zhong Muling had. She obtained this bead after she killed that man from Yin Clan on Mount Yunwu. In the past few years, she didn't know what it was used for, so she kept it in her Chengkuan bag without touching it. She didn't know whether this bead was the same as Zhong Muling's, but in terms of appearance it was very similar. Moreover, even the spiritual aura it sensed was very similar. Zhong Muling's bead had been refined inside his body. The bead he used to open the virtual sky world was most likely a magic weapon related to the virtual sky world. Mo Chenga wondered if she could also obtain a virtual sky world with this bead in hand. Thinking up to this point, Mo Chenga couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. How good would it be if she had a portable immortal's cave like the virtual sky world? With such dense spiritual aura, spiritual plants would definitely grow quickly if she planted them. She could take them with her wherever she went and wouldn't have to worry about being discovered. The more she thought about it, the more her heart itched. However, just as she was about to ask about this bead, Zhong Muling sent her out of the virtual sky world. Now she had no one to ask. Even if she had this bead in hand, she could only sigh helplessly. Mo Chenga was about to throw the bead back into her Chengkuan bag when she suddenly remembered what Yuan Bao said. Yuan Bao once chatted with her and said the virtual sky world was a magic weapon that recognized its master. Unless the primordial spirit completely dissipated, other people couldn't take it away. But as long as it recognized its master, it couldn't escape those few methods. After thinking for a while, she suddenly had an idea. She immediately gathered her spiritual aura and lightly cut her fingertip. Blood flowed out and she dripped it on the bead. The bright red blood slowly sank into the white bead and gradually disappeared. All of a sudden she felt a sharp pain in her head. She felt countless information rushing into her brain in an instant. From the distant past era, birds and beasts, all kinds of spiritual creatures, cultivators and demonic beasts, many words, countless images, these things flashed in front of her eyes as if she had experienced them herself. It was as if someone had stuffed these things into her head. Pain, she didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe it was a long time or maybe it was only a moment, but her head gradually stopped hurting. Mo Chenga looked up and suddenly widened her eyes. She wasn't sitting in the tent on Luoyen Cliff, but in an unfamiliar place with dense spiritual aura. Among the dense bamboo forest, several bamboo houses were faintly discernible. A winding brook bypassed them and flowed into the distance. A gentle breeze blew into her nose. It was the medicinal fragrance of spiritual plants. Bamboo forest, huts, brook, medicinal fields. She was ecstatic. This was the virtual sky world. Must be the virtual sky world. Mo Chenga suddenly stood up from the ground and ran into the hut. She didn't know how many years it had been since someone entered this hut. The floor was covered with a thick layer of dust, almost covering everything. She used a few simple spells. In the blink of an eye, the hut was spotless. There were tables and chairs made of spiritual bamboo, several praying mats scattered on the ground, and a bookshelf in the corner of the hut filled with books. She gently approached it, pulled out a book from the bookshelf and opened it. Written on it was an ancient language written with magic. The animal skin made of the book was soft and tough. She didn't know what demonic beast it belonged to. Closing the book, Mo Chenga had a strange feeling. She originally didn't know such ancient language, but she understood it at first glance. And she could recognize every single thing in this hut. She walked out of the hut and went around the bamboo forest. As far as her eyes could see, there were spiritual creatures of all sizes. There were trees, flowers, grasses, vines and countless spiritual creatures crowded together. The ground was covered with layers and layers of thick leaves. She didn't know how many years it took for the plants to grow and die on their own to produce such a scene. Mo Chenga finally understood. The virtual sky world was a spatial magic weapon left from the distant past era. After it lost its master, no one knew what it was. It fell into the hands of a man from the Yin clan and was eventually obtained by her. If she hadn't happened to enter Zhong Muling's virtual sky world, she probably wouldn't have known she had a rare treasure until she died. How much wealth did the spiritual plants accumulated in this virtual sky world for hundreds of thousands of years amount to? Especially the spiritual plants that were more than 10,000 years old. Any one of them could shock the celestial pole. Mo Chenga fell to the ground after touching a 10,000-year-old seven-withered grass with her own hands. She couldn't help but laugh dully. Ever since she embarked on the path of cultivation, she encountered a lot of bad luck, but fated chances were very few. This time, in just a few days, she encountered a series of fated chances that ordinary people couldn't encounter in their entire lives. The art of the origin, the five spirits body cultivation technique, the guidance of a deification cultivator, the gift from her great ancestor, and this virtual sky world. This gave her an unreal sense of happiness. But the spiritual plants were real, the soil was real, the hut was real, and the spiritual aura was real. With these things, would she still need to be confused about her future? Chenga didn't know how much time had passed, but she gradually calmed down. No matter how many spiritual treasures she had, she was still a foundation-building cultivator. As long as she didn't reach the Great Tao, she wouldn't have the ability to protect herself. Besides, there was a demonic beast riot right now. Saving her life was the most important thing. With this thought in mind, Chenga stood up and carefully observed this virtual sky world. Obviously, each virtual sky world was different. Zhong Muling's was a wooden hut and a pond, while this one was a bamboo hut and a bamboo forest and a brook. However, the spiritual aura was almost the same and they were both very dense. In addition, her virtual sky world had another advantage over Zhong Muling's. The spiritual plants here were densely packed and had been growing freely for at least hundreds of thousands of years. Among them, there were countless 10,000-year-old spiritual plants that multiplied, squeezing the medicinal field to the point where there was almost no space to stand. Zhong Muling's virtual sky world, on the other hand, didn't have so many spiritual plants. Perhaps it was because he had been in the deification realm for thousands of years and had already used or collected some of the spiritual plants. Looking at the endless medicinal field under the breeze, Chenga couldn't help but think that she had no choice but to practice pill concocting now. Most of these spiritual plants couldn't be taken outside. If she wanted to use them, she could only concoct them herself. Moreover, with so many spiritual plants, would she still need to worry about not having enough talent in pill concocting? Moreover, she could also collect as many ancient pill recipes as possible. In the current cultivation world, although ancient pill recipes still existed, most of them were useless because most of the spiritual plants had long disappeared from the world. Even if she had the pill recipes, she wouldn't be able to concoct spiritual medicines. But she didn't need to worry about this problem. There were so many spiritual plants here, which should have been planted by the former master of this virtual sky world. There must be spiritual plants commonly used in pill concocting. Even if some were missing, it would be enough for her to concoct several kinds of ancient medicinal pills. Thinking up to this point, Chenga couldn't help but laugh. For the first time, she felt that her cultivation path would be a bright one. Chapter 118. Next, Chenga heard several shocking pieces of news. First of all, the cultivators on Luoyan Cliff were about to disperse. Because the demonic beasts repeatedly failed to break through, the smart high-level demonic beasts scattered and destroyed everything around them. They had no choice but to split up and hunt. Second, there was news from East Kunwu that Danding School didn't have time to activate all the Great Mountain Protecting Formation before it was breached by a 9th-ranked demonic beast. They lost a lot of disciples and came to ask for help. Finally, it was said that Martial Uncle Shoujing was seriously injured and couldn't hold on anymore, so he had to return to Mount Taikong to recuperate. Upon hearing the first two pieces of news, Chenga finally realized that the demonic beast riot was so serious that even a 9th-ranked demonic beast appeared, which was equivalent to a cultivator in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. The last piece of news gave her a strange feeling, and a thought flashed through her mind. But before she could think too much about it, Martial Uncle Xianin informed her that they had another important task and that she and Luo Fengxue should immediately follow him to Danding School. Chenga didn't expect that the task of supporting Danding School would fall on them, so she felt a bit nervous. Luo Fengxue secretly told her that after Danding School was attacked, many cultivation groups would send people to support them, so the demonic beasts wouldn't dare to continue attacking, so they would be safe. Chenga thought it made sense. Besides, Danding School originally had a nascent soul cultivator, and it was only breached by accident. But since the day she came out of the virtual sky world, she didn't have a chance to enter again. Luo Fengxue stayed with her all the way. Although she had a good relationship with Luo Fengxue, the virtual sky world was, after all, a heaven-defying magic weapon, so she decided not to tell anyone. Nevertheless, the next step was to hurry on with their journey, so it wasn't a waste of time. Danding School was located in the central part of West Kunwu, not far from Shenqing School. It would only take 3 to 5 days to get there from Luoyan Cliff on a core formation cultivator's flying magic weapon. Several days later, Martial Uncle Xianyin led the group of foundation-building disciples to Mount Tianhua of Danding School. Mo Chenga saw a towering mountain from afar, and the volcano at the peak was emitting hot underground fire. Reportedly, the reason why Danding School was established here was precisely because this was the largest volcano in Kunwo. It must be known that in addition to concocting techniques, concocting fire was also extremely important. Aside from Dantian fire, earth vein fire was also an excellent concocting fire. Especially high-grade earth vein fire, it could almost compare to sun-real fire and was much better than the Dantian fire of low-level cultivators. The reason why this Skyfire volcano was called the Skyfire Mountain was said to be because the earth vein fire here was of extremely high quality. Red flames shot out of the volcano from time to time, attracting the attention of many disciples. In the middle of the volcano, there was a huge green cauldron floating in the air. This was the symbol of the Pill Cauldron School. All the disciples of the ordinary Pill Cauldron School had this symbol on their clothes. However, from afar, they noticed that the Pill Cauldron School had suffered serious damage. The lofty mountain gate had already collapsed and several of the houses surrounding the volcano had collapsed. The square was filled with broken bricks and broken jades. Danding School disciples dressed in black clothes were walking back and forth. There were also a lot of cultivators dressed in the clothes of other cultivation groups busying themselves. Mo Chenga looked around. Most of them were ore refining cultivators, and a few were foundation building cultivators. There wasn't even a single core formation cultivator among them. This wasn't strange at all. Ore refining disciples were the most numerous disciples and cultivation groups. If Xianqing School hadn't closed its mountain gate, they would have definitely sent ore refining disciples led by foundation building cultivators. As for core formation cultivators, there weren't many core formation cultivators in small and medium-sized cultivation groups. They weren't even strong enough to protect their own cultivation groups and clans, so why would they send them to support other cultivation groups? Only Xianqing School, which had closed its mountain gate a long time ago, could afford to send so many core formation cultivators. Before they reached Danding School's great mountain protecting formation, a flight light rose from Mount Skyfire. Soon after, the great mountain protecting formation was opened. A core formation female cultivator led several disciples to welcome the newcomer. Senior Martial Brother Xianyin were honored by your presence. Master Taoist Xianyin cupped his hands in greeting and said with a smile, Junior Martial Sister Mo, there's no need to be so polite. This is what I should do. The female cultivator shook her head and said with a bitter smile, everyone else is busy taking care of themselves. Only your Xianqing School sent a core formation cultivator. Senior Martial Brother Xianyin, to tell you the truth, we're currently lacking high-level cultivators. We're really grateful that you came. Master Taoist Xianyin still had a faint smile on his face. Our cultivation groups are friends, so we should help each other. Junior Martial Sister Mo, you don't have to do this. By the way, how's the current situation? Alas, the situation isn't good. Senior Martial Brother Xianyin, please come with me. After he said that, he turned to the foundation building disciples behind him and said, take care of the martial nephews and nephews of Xianqing School. Don't neglect them. Yes, Master. The female cultivator led Master Taoist Xianyin to the main hall while Mo Tianga and the other foundation building disciples were arranged to live in temporary immortals' caves by the other reception disciples. Because there were a lot of cultivators coming, Shi Luo Fengxue Han Qingyu Wei Jiasi, and the others were arranged to live together. Mo Tianga looked around the temporary immortals' caves and was very happy because there was a concocting room inside. She could use the earthly fire to enter the room, so she could practice her pill concocting skills here temporarily. In addition, this was Danding School, so there were naturally many pill recipes here. Thus, she found an opportunity to come out with Luo Fengxue. Tianga, if you want pill recipes you can ask Master. Our Xianqing School also has a lot of pill recipes. Faced with Luo Fengxue's question, Mo Tianga answered, Senior Martial Sister Luo, once I do something I'm single-minded. Now that I'm learning pill concocting, I really want to collect as many pill recipes as possible. Although our Xianqing School certainly has a lot of pill recipes, Danding School is a cultivation group famous for its pill concocting, so there must be something special about it. Maybe we can find something good. You're right. Although they had just gone through a disaster, the market square inside Danding School was still open as usual. Because many disciples were injured and many magic tools, spiritual talismans, and so on were lost, the market square was still very lively. Mo Chenga had already asked Danding school disciples about it, so she didn't stroll around and directly pulled Luo Fengxue into a shop. "Hey, martial uncles of Shenqing school, please come in." As soon as they entered, the shop assistant greeted them enthusiastically. Probably because there had been a lot of disciples from his school coming here recently, he skillfully recognized their clothes and quickly brought them tea. "Martial uncles, do you have any instructions?" Mo Chenga had never been treated so warmly before she even said anything, so she felt a bit uncomfortable. Luo Fengxue, on the other hand, was very calm. She had been an elite disciple since she was a child and was also a steward. What kind of flattery hadn't she seen before? This kind of treatment was a matter of course. Seeing that Mo Chenga didn't say anything, Luo Fengxue took over the conversation. "Do you have any good things here? We want to buy some in preparation for exterminating demons." Upon hearing this, the shop assistant's smile became even brighter. "Martial uncles, to thank you for your assistance, the sect head issued an order a few days ago to give all shops in our school a 20% discount. We have everything you want in our shop. Magic tools, spiritual talismans, medicinal pills. As long as you need it, you can find it." "Oh? There's no need for magic tools since we won't be using them for the time being. You can just give us spiritual talismans and medicinal pills. Spiritual plants are also fine, but they have to be at least 200 years old." Yes. Please wait here for a moment." After the shop assistant left, Luo Fengxue smiled and said, "This is a good opportunity. Danding school has a lot of good medicinal materials that we can't usually see. 20% discount, let's buy as much as we want." With the virtual sky world, Mo Chenga didn't care about these common spiritual plants, but she still nodded with a smile. The shop assistant moved very quickly. In a short moment he came back with a cloth bag. This cloth bag was also a kind of Chengkuan bag, but it had a small capacity and was extremely cheap. Shops usually used it to move goods. The shop assistant laid out the items on the table one by one and said with a smile, "Martial uncles, please take a look. These are foundation building realm spiritual talismans made by our school's core formation elders. Originally this small shop was just keeping up appearances, but now that we urgently need spiritual talismans, we took them all out." Mo Chenga picked up a talisman. Sure enough, it was a high-grade rustling falling wood talisman. There were also several world of ice and snow, sword light flickering shadow, and so on. The talismans were enshrouded in dense spiritual aura. They were made from the skin and blood of 3rd or 4th rank spiritual beasts instead of ordinary talisman paper and cinnabar. These are several special magic tools. They don't need to be refined, so maybe martial uncles will take a liking to them. The shop assistant opened a jade box. Inside were several dozens of glittering and translucent flying needles arranged neatly. Mo Chenga picked one up and saw that it was as thin as a feather. She couldn't sense any spiritual aura, but she could still feel the spiritual aura sealed on the tip of the needle. "And here are the spiritual plants. Martial uncles, if you have any specific needs, please don't hesitate to tell us. The other things in Danding School's inventory might not be great, but the spiritual plants we have are among the best in the celestial pole." As they listened to the shop assistant's proud introduction, Mo Chenga and Luo Fengxue lowered their heads to examine the items. Sure enough, snow chestnut flower, purple slough grass, blue pearl jade, snow rasher mushroom. These were all relatively rare spiritual plants, and the ones on the table were all more than 200 years old. Mo Chenga and Luo Fengxue glanced at each other. "Senior Martial Sister Luo, what do you think?" Luo Fengxue smiled. "Why don't we buy them together? In the future, whoever needs them can split them." "And?" Mo Chenga nodded, then said to the shop assistant, "We want all these spiritual plants. You can calculate how many spirit stones we'll need." The shop assistant looked astonished. Even though these rare spiritual plants weren't very old, they still cost a lot of money. Moreover, there were at least 10 of them here, so no matter what, it would still cost 5,000 to 6,000 spirit stones. That many spirit stones was a huge fortune. Ordinary foundation building cultivators' annual rations were only about 1,000 spirit stones at most. However, he quickly regained his composure. After a simple count, he answered, "Martial uncles, there are a total of 5,760 spirit stones here. After a 20% discount, it'll be 4,608 spirit stones. Let's just erase the number and count it as 4,600 spirit stones." "Alright, you can pack them up," Luo Fengxue instructed him. She then asked Mo Chenga, "I only want these spiritual plants. What else do you want?" Emo Chenga muttered to herself for a while, then pointed at the flying needle-like magic tool. When she fought for foundation-building pills in Yunwu sect, she once obtained a handful of flying needles from Murongzi. However, the more she used them, the fewer they became. Moreover, she was already in the foundation-building realm, so they were no longer of much use. These things were indeed good for sneak attacks. Keeping some of them on her could be used in case of emergencies. By the way, Emo Chenga said after the shop assistant packed up all the things and collected the spirit stones from Luo Fengxue, pretending to ask casually, "This is Danding School's shop. Are there any good pill recipes for sale?" The shop assistant immediately answered, "Of course. Our Danding School is most outstanding in pill concocting. We have both ordinary pill recipes and some rare pill recipes. However, it depends on what kind of pill recipes Martial Uncle wants. We can't sell some special pill recipes. The sect's core formation grandmasters have to make the decision." As the #1 pill concocting group, Danding School naturally had some unique skills that outsiders didn't have. Emo Chenga wasn't surprised by his answer and asked, "What about ancient pill recipes?" "Ancient pill recipes?" The shop assistant was startled and asked, "Martial Uncle, why do you want ancient pill recipes?" Many of the spiritual plants in ancient pill recipes have been lost, so they naturally lost their value. Emo Chenga had long thought of an excuse, so she simply said faintly, "I've done some research on the Tao of pill concocting. Some ancient medicinal pills have excellent medicinal properties, so I want to use ordinary medicinal plants as replacements to see if I can refine them into medicinal pills." "Oh, so Martial Uncle is also a kindred spirit." A smile blossomed on the shop assistant's face. His attitude towards Emo Chenga became a bit more cordial. He said, "This isn't a big deal. Our school is also studying it. Pill recipes can also be sold to outsiders, but the price is slightly higher." Emo Chenga said, "This isn't a big deal. If they're good, just bring them to me." Chapter 119. He received several pill formulas from Danding School. There was a spirit-gathering pill suitable for foundation-building cultivators, a clear sky pill suitable for core formation cultivators, an aura-stabilizing pill, a look-preserving pill, and even a longevity pill. The effects of the essence-gathering pill seemed ordinary. It was just a common pill for foundation establishment cultivators to take to increase their cultivation, but in reality, the effects of the ancient pill recipe couldn't be compared to the essence-enhancing pill of today. The same principle applied to the Azure Cloud pill. As for aura-stabilizing pills, look-preserving pills, and longevity pills, aura-stabilizing pills were good medicine for adjusting spiritual aura and were most suitable for people who had just experienced spiritual aura deviation. Although Emo Chenga wouldn't be in danger of experiencing spiritual aura deviation in the future, it was still extremely useful when she made a realm breakthrough. As for the looking-preserving pill and the longevity pill, although they had the same names and effects, their medicinal effects were different. The current looking-preserving pill could only preserve one's appearance for 10 years, while the looking-preserving pill could preserve one's youth forever. The longevity pill was the same. It didn't extend one's lifespan by 100 years, but rather by 500 years. Forget about the other medicinal pills, this longevity pill's medicinal effects were too shocking. It could increase a core formation cultivator's lifespan by 500 years. It was enough for a core formation cultivator to advance from the core formation stage to the nascent soul stage. Perhaps it could even allow a nascent soul cultivator to reach the soul formation stage. Now, even the immortality elixir with a 100-year medicinal effect was something that only nascent soul cultivators could obtain. She sighed inwardly. If Second Uncle had known that she had a rare treasure when he was still alive, how could he have let Second Uncle die with hatred? Moreover, ever since she obtained the virtual sky world, it was as if the hundreds of thousands of years of time the virtual sky world had experienced flowed into her memory in an instant. She clearly remembered every kind of spiritual plant inside, so when she chose pill recipes, she chose all kinds of spiritual plants. Luo Fengxue didn't know about this. She only knew Emo Chenga spent a lot of money to buy useless pill recipes, so she kept muttering about it on the way back. However, she had been a disciple of a famous school since she was a child and her master was fond of her. Her family was even richer than Emo Chenga's, so she didn't think a few thousand spirit stones was a big deal. She grumbled for a while, but seeing that Emo Chenga didn't care, she no longer said anything. Right after the two of them entered the temporary immortal's cave, they saw Han Qingyu and Wei Jiaxi sitting together in the living room. They seemed to be waiting for them. Upon seeing them, Han Qingyu said happily, "You're finally back. Hurry up, we're about to set off." What? Luo Fengxue asked in confusion. Eldest martial sister, where are we going? Han Qingyu said, we didn't come to danding school to play around. After resting for a few days, it's time for us to go kill monsters. Oh, that was true. Currently, many of danding school's disciples had died. If they, as reinforcements, just sat there and played, it wouldn't be right. The few of them did not have anything to prepare. They were not mortals. All of their belongings were kept in their cosmos sacks. They could just leave. 15 minutes later, under Han Qingyu's lead, the four of them left Mount Heaven volcano. While they were shopping, Master Daoist Shenin assigned them a task. He told Han Qingyu and Wei Jiasi to wait for them to come back before they set off. On the way, Han Qingyu briefly explained their mission. As it turned out, there were low-ranked demonic beasts roaming in the vicinity of their clan's territory. Their clan couldn't hold on any longer, so they were asked to go and provide reinforcements. The four of them were foundation-building cultivators, so they could already be considered high-level cultivators in Danding School. Although Danding School was one of the 7 great cultivation groups, it couldn't compare to Tiandao Sect or Shenqing School. They were good at pill concocting, but their cultivation levels were relatively ordinary. The number of people in their school was only slightly more than that of medium-sized cultivation groups. Now that they had suffered disastrous losses, they couldn't provide more foundation-building cultivators. However, demonic beasts were mostly in the 1st or 2nd rank. Demonic beasts in the 4th rank and above were rarely seen. Therefore, the four of them, together with the cultivators from their clans, weren't in too much danger. Half a day later, they finally arrived at the branch of Mount Heaven volcano. The four of them watched from afar as a group of patrolling cultivators flew towards them. This group of patrolling cultivators was also composed of aura refining cultivators and was led by a foundation-building cultivator. The foundation-building cultivator leading the group was only in the early stage of the foundation-building realm. His hair was half white and he looked like an old man. Obviously, he didn't have much time left in his life. In cultivation clans that relied on cultivation groups, the young and talented cultivators would usually stay in their groups. Only those who didn't have much time left in their lives and had no hope of making a realm breakthrough would return to their clans to train their descendants. As the cultivator flew closer, he looked at them cautiously. After carefully sizing them up, he cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoists, may I ask who you are?" Han Qingyu showed a faint smile and took out an identity tablet. "Fellow Taoists, we're disciples of Shenqing School. We were ordered to assist Danding School, so we've come to assist you." The old man took the identity tablet. After verifying it, his expression changed from cautiousness to pleasant surprise. He approached them and bowed repeatedly. "Fellow Taoists from Shenqing School, this matter is of great importance. I'm really sorry for offending you just now. I'm a cultivator from Yu clan. I'll report to the clan head and come to welcome you. Please wait here for a moment." Han Qingyu made an inviting gesture. The cultivator then took out a summoning talisman and whispered a few words. The summoning talisman then turned into a beam of light and flew towards the house below. As the summoning talisman disappeared, several flight lights immediately rose from below. When they came closer, Mo Chenga could clearly see that they were a middle-aged cultivator, a beautiful young woman and an old man. The middle-aged cultivator's cultivation level was the highest among them. He was in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. He had long hair and a black beard. He was dressed in a Cosmos Taoist robe and looked very dignified. Both the young woman and the old man were in the early stage of the foundation-building realm. The young woman was gentle and demure while the old man looked ordinary. As soon as the three of them came closer, the middle-aged cultivator smiled and said from afar, "Fairies, we're honored by your presence. I didn't go out to welcome you, please don't take offense." Fairies? Mo Chinga felt a bit dizzy when she heard this form of address. She knew female cultivators were sometimes called fairies, but in general mortals called them that. The path to immortality had nothing to do with men and women, so they still addressed each other as fellow Taoists. This middle-aged cultivator called them fairies as soon as they met to show his respect. However, Mo Chinga really wasn't used to it. Han Qingyu remained calm and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, please don't be so polite. We're both cultivators, so you can just call us fellow Taoist." Seeing that she was behaving appropriately, the middle-aged cultivator knew they weren't proud and arrogant female cultivators, so he also smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you're right. I'll do as you say. Oh, I'm Yu Jingfeng, the clan head of Yu clan. This is my wife and this is my clan brother, Haitao." The cultivator pointed at the two people next to him. The young woman and the old man saluted him together. After they finished saluting him, he asked with a smile, may I know fellow Taoists' names? Mo Chenga and the others returned the salute before Han Qingyu answered, I'm Han Qingyu from Shenqing School. These are my junior martial sisters, Wei Jiaxi, Luo Fengxue and Mo Chenga. So it's fellow Taoist Han, fellow Taoist Wei, fellow Taoist Luo, and fellow Taoist Mo. Fellow Taoists, you're all so young, but your cultivation levels are already high. You're truly admirable. Han Qingyu smiled gracefully and said, Clan head you, please don't be so polite. Among us martial sisters, my two junior martial sisters are worthy of this praise. Junior martial sister Wei and I, on the other hand, are already over 100 years old, so we're nothing. Most female cultivators used cultivation techniques to preserve their youthful looks. Even if they didn't, they would still take look-preserving pills. Because of this, both Han Qingyu and Wei Jiaxi looked like they were in their early 20s. Furthermore, one of them was in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm while the other was in the late stage of the foundation-building realm. Based on their lifespans, they looked to be in their 30s at most. Han Qingyu's words were actually quite modest. Clan head Yu was a quick-witted person. Once he heard Han Qingyu's words, he immediately waved his hand and said, Hey, fellow Taoist Han is too polite. Even if you and fellow Taoist Wei are already over 100 years old, your future prospects are still boundless. Fellow Taoist Han is already in the late stage of the foundation-building realm, and he's also the descendant of a famous cultivation group. Maybe one day he'll form his gold core. He'll truly be a talented young man. I wouldn't dare. Between the two of them, one was praising her while the other was being modest, making Mo Chenga feel very gloomy. Senior martial sister Han really had this much patience. If it were her, although she would also say a few polite words, she would definitely end the topic early. After talking for a quarter of an hour, the patrolling foundation building cultivator had already gone back to his patrol. Before the two of them could finish talking, fortunately Madame Yu, who was standing next to Clan Head Yu, saw an opportunity and interrupted their conversation. She said reproachfully, Husband, fellow Taoists have just arrived. Why don't you invite them inside to sit first? Clan Head Yu suddenly understood and said with a remorseful expression, You're right. I was too forgetful. Fortunately, Madame reminded me. Fellow Taoists, I'm sorry. Please come inside and take a seat. Han Qingyu smiled. With Clan Head Yu leading the way, the group of people landed in Yu Clan's courtyard. Clan Head Yu welcomed the four of them into the main hall. They sat down according to the order of the host and guests and ordered them to serve tea before they finally got down to business. To be honest, fellow Taoists, my Yu Clan's current situation isn't very good. You're all disciples of famous sects, so you should be able to see that my Yu Clan's defensive formation can't be considered top-notch. Moreover, we only have 4 foundation-building cultivators. We're from a small sect and our magic tools and medicinal pills aren't good either. When the demonic beasts attacked last time, my clan elder brother was injured. My wife and I also destroyed our magic tools, so we had no choice but to ask the sect for help. Fortunately, you came in time. Han Qingyu didn't act modest this time. She pondered for a moment then asked, Clan Head Yu, how's your current fighting strength? Fellow Taoist Hai Tao is injured, so let's not count for now. Do you and Madame Yu still have any means to defend against the enemy? Clan Head Yu nodded. He stroked his beard and muttered to himself for a moment before answering, Although Madame and I destroyed our magic tools, we still have other means. Now we won't have any problems fighting demonic beasts of the same rank. My clan elder brother is old and injured, so he probably can't join the battle right away. Also, the one outside is my nephew. Although his cultivation level is lower than mine, he's very powerful in fights of magical power. His odds of winning against a demonic beast of a higher rank are slightly higher. Is that so? Han Qingyu originally didn't have much hope for Yu Clan, so she wasn't disappointed. Now she shifted her gaze towards the 3 of them and asked, What do you think? Among the 3 of them, Wei Jiaxi was the oldest, so she spoke first. Eldest martial sister, I don't think there's any problem. You and I can fight one against many. Fengxue and Tiange also have some means, so we won't have to worry about our safety in fights of magical power against demonic beasts of the same rank. Luo Fengxue said, Eldest martial sister, we can rearrange Yu Clan's cultivators. Maybe the aura refining cultivators can also play a big role. Mo Chenga pondered for a long time before she finally said, I can rearrange Yu Clan's defensive formation. It should be able to increase its defensive power by half, as well as several means of attack. Han Qingyu nodded with a smile. This was also what she had thought of. Wei Jiaxi had always focused on fights of magical power, Luo Fengxue was good at management, and Mo Chinga was good at formations. The three of them all focused on different things. As for herself, she had always been the eldest martial sister, but she was good at leading people and making the final decision. The four of them had different characters, but they complemented each other, so Master Daoist Xianyin sent them out together. The three people from Yu clan were pleasantly surprised to hear this. If that was the case, their arrival wouldn't just give Yu clan 4 more foundation-building cultivators. Yu clan could be saved now. Chapter 120. When they arrived at Yu clan, the four of them were finally given separate rooms. Right now they had no time to study pill concocting or cultivate, so Mo Chinga entered the virtual sky world. She only stayed for a moment and took out some books. Because she got the memories of the virtual sky world, Mo Chinga finally understood why she could enter the virtual sky world so easily. This virtual sky world must have been lost in the world. Many people must have tried to make it recognize them by blood, but only she succeeded. It was probably because of her spiritual roots of the origin. The virtual sky world was a thing from the distant past. The cultivation techniques of the distant past era were very different from those of the present era. Even though spiritual roots of the origin only appeared every few thousand years, everyone practiced the art of the origin. Therefore, people with spiritual power all had primal chaos inside their bodies. The virtual sky world was created at that time, and its principles were also similar to primal chaos. However, the art of the origin was lost, so people of the present era couldn't awaken the virtual sky world even if they dripped their blood on it. Mo Chinga guessed that in addition to Zhong Muling, there was another deification cultivator who had a virtual sky world. He must have used some special method to create primal chaos to make the virtual sky world recognize him as its master. There were traces left by the previous owner of the virtual sky world. Mo Chinga didn't know who that owner was. There were a lot of books, but unfortunately he didn't leave any magic weapons. Presumably he carried those things with him and lost them when he died. However, that person must have been a person with great divine power. Mo Chinga found a notebook that recorded some of that person's reflections on cultivation, but she couldn't understand it at all. She knew it must be because her realm was too low. According to Yuan Bao, the great divine power of the distant past era wasn't something ordinary nascent soul cultivators could do. It was a realm above the deification realm they didn't know, because Zhong Muling's virtual sky world also had these miscellaneous things, which they couldn't understand with their realm. However, there were some simple books that shocked her. The art of alchemy, the art of talisman crafting, the art of crafting, the art of crafting, the art of setting up arrays, and even the art of mechanisms. Because she had the deepest understanding of arrays, she started learning the art of setting up arrays as soon as she could. There was a kind of illusory sky formation recorded in the book, which should be the formation Zhong Muling arranged outside his virtual sky world. The book described this formation as the formation of 10,000 images. With a single thought, 10,000 images would appear. The illusory formations Mo Chinga experienced were only 2 of the weakest ones. However, that was all she could understand. Her cultivation level also affected her ability to understand Tao, and Tao was divided into Yin and Yang and the 5 elements, which was the foundation of the formation. If her cultivation level was not high enough, she would not be able to go further. Even without the illusory sky formation, there were some simple formations recorded in it that were not something that could be compared to today's formations. The Yu clan's defensive formation was called the 4 Symbols Formation. Although it wasn't an ordinary formation, it wasn't a profound one either. Generally, only a few mid-level cultivation clans would use it. From these books, Mo Chinga also found the 4 Symbols Formation. However, the arrangement method was somewhat different from the one she used today, and its power was also much greater. In addition, there was also a kind of 4 Symbols 100 Flowers formation, which was a variation of the 4 Symbols Formation. It was based on the 4 Symbols Formation and combined with the arrangement method of another formation called the Waxing and Waning Formation, making it a kind of compound formation. At one moment there were 4 symbols and at the other moment there were hundreds of flowers. The 2 formations were completely unrelated, but they combined into one. It was basically impossible to break the formation with a single method. When Mo Chinga saw this kind of formation arrangement method, she was amazed by its master. The theory was really simple and could be understood with just a hint. However, before this she never had this kind of idea. When demonic beasts cultivated to a high level, they would also develop intelligence, but 3rd and 4th ranked demonic beasts still couldn't understand human speech. Their bodies were tyrannical and they didn't have spiritual roots. Compared to human cultivators, their spiritual power was pure, so they had an advantage in fights of magical power. However, the external objects created by human cultivators relying on their intelligence were often superior to them, such as magic weapons, talismans, formations, and so on. Among these things, formations were the cheapest and most effective. After Mo Qiange said she wanted to rearrange Yu Clan's formation, the patriarch of Yu Clan, who was a smart person, was very enthusiastic towards her and even sent many cultivators to help her. However, Mo Qiange drove all those people back. It wasn't that she was afraid of leaking the secret, but rather that these aura-refining cultivators would only be a hindrance to her. It was better for her to arrange the formation herself. Aside from formation discs, formation flags, and spirit stones, there were also some specific spiritual beasts, spiritual plants, or spiritual objects. The reason why Mo Qiange directly chose to modify the four symbols formation was because this was the original formation, so it was convenient to modify it. The second reason was because the materials needed for this formation were simple. Only a kind of spiritual wood, which could be found in the virtual sky world. Mo Qiange spent a whole day to thoroughly understand the four symbols formation. After that, she spent only an hour to finish laying the formation. She then easily finished her work. Reportedly, Yu Clan had 2 young cultivators in danding school. Patriarch Yu actually ate a look-preserving pill, which was why he was so young. As for Madame Yu, she wasn't young anymore. Among the 4 of them, the youngest only had a lifespan of 100 years. None of them had advanced to the late stage, so they simply came back to wholeheartedly cultivate their descendants. Although the cultivation levels of these 4 people were ordinary, they had good foresight. Yu Clan's cultivators also had a good foundation. Unfortunately, they obviously couldn't compare to Xianqing School's elite disciples. They couldn't even compare to the ordinary disciples of Clear Spring Peak, which made Luo Fengxue both angry and anxious. Mo Qiange sat leisurely on the side, reading a formation book while watching Luo Fengxue angrily scolding the Yu Clan disciples. "Hey you! Do you know how to use talismans?" "Senior, I am only in the first layer of the aura refining realm." "You're still a cultivator in the first layer of the aura refining realm. You're a cultivator, but you actually don't know how to use talismans. How shameful. Go to the side and watch me." Thus, she made a pose to draw talisman paper and demonstrated in a very natural and unrestrained manner. "Do you know how?" That boy, who was only 14 or 15 years old, stared at Luo Fengxue in fear. Luo Fengxue was enraged by his stare. "You still don't know how?" "Senior," the boy cried, "I'll slowly learn. Don't tell me to move things, I'll be laughed at." Moving things was a mortal's job. In the past 2 days, Luo Fengxue had reorganized all the people in Yu Clan. The mortals did chores while the cultivators practiced several kinds of simple formations and some fighting techniques. Luo Fengxue was used to doing these things, so her movements were extremely fast. It only took her 1 day to have everyone return to their respective positions. When the child cried, Luo Fengshue's anger was somewhat suppressed. She had always been popular in the school. In addition to her high status, she also had a good character. Even if ordinary disciples needed her help, she would help them if she could. Therefore, when she saw this child looking at her pitifully, her heart softened. "You come here." Luo Fengxue called a cultivator in the 3rd layer of the aura refining realm who was already in his 30s. She then pointed at the boy and said, "Teach him how to use talismans." That cultivator obediently walked towards her. He was also trembling with fear and cautiously answered, "Yes." Thus, like this, the older cultivator explained in detail how to use talismans bit by bit while Luo Fengxue added a few more sentences. An hour later, the boy cried out, "Senior, please let me move the things." Luo Fengxue couldn't breathe. She was so angry that she almost blacked out. At that moment, Mo Qiange couldn't bear it anymore. She covered her mouth and giggled. Luo Fengxue heard the muffled laughter. She turned around with a murderous look, but when she saw it was Mo Qiange, she immediately froze. After ordering the more outstanding aura refining cultivators to continue teaching, Luo Fengxue weakly sat next to her. Mo Qiange stopped laughing and earnestly comforted her. "That's enough. These cultivators don't even have the qualifications to enter the school, so it's obvious what kind of talents they are. You're asking too much of them by using the standards of our school's disciples." Luo Fengxue shouted, "Ask them? I'm not asking them at all, okay? Not to mention the elite disciples, even if ordinary disciples of Xianqing School were to line up in a formation and use their own methods, it wouldn't be a problem for several aura-refining disciples to fight against a second-ranked demonic beast. But look at them, what did I ask for? I asked them to stand in their positions and use whatever they should use, but they actually don't even know how to use talismans. She paused for a moment then turned around angrily. Tell me, have you ever heard of a cultivator who doesn't even know how to use talismans? They don't need any techniques. Emo Chenga sighed. I've seen them. Luo Fengxue originally wanted to express her anger, but once she heard Emo Chenga's serious answer, she was stunned. There really are? Emo Chenga nodded and said, in the past I wandered the world with second uncle. What haven't we seen? Cultivation clans are getting worse and worse with each generation. There are many examples. Some clans' children not only have mixed spiritual roots, but they're also very weak. Even if we let them cultivate, it's still better than nothing. Some people are trapped in the first layer of the aura refining realm their whole lives, and some people's intelligence is the same as ordinary people's or even worse. That's how our Yi clan declined. Luo Fengxue was speechless. She was found by Master Daoist Xianyin from the secular world. Because her spiritual roots were excellent, she was directly taken to Mount Taikang and accepted as an inner disciple, so she didn't know much about cultivation clans. Forget it, just do whatever you want. When the time comes, it'll be fine as long as they can deal with first-rank demonic beasts. We'll take care of the rest. You don't need to worry too much. Senior Martial Sister Han will make arrangements. In the end, won't they still have to rely on us? It's already not bad if these aura-refining cultivators can protect themselves. I just hope we don't have to be distracted to protect them, but they're like this. Alright, I admit I can't play a role in this matter. Emo Chenga smiled. Luo Fengshue's dejected appearance was really rare. Didn't you already understand this? Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. Fighting and brawling aren't your strong points. You'd better leave these things to them and make preparations on your own. And you're right. Luo Fengxue pondered for a moment then cast aside her unhappy mood. Right, do you still have a lot of talismans? I've already used up most of them. Eldest martial sister gave me some, but it's still not enough. Emo Chenga knew Luo Fengxue didn't have enough time to sacrifice and refine magic tools, so she needed talismans more than the others. She made a rough inventory in her mind then took out a stack of talismans. I have a lot here. These were given to me by martial uncle. There's also this. Upon seeing the talismans Emo Chenga took out, Luo Fengxue cheered. The two of them began to divide the talismans among themselves. Oh, Chenga, these talismans are so strange. They don't seem to be made by master and they look very powerful. They couldn't have been bought outside, right? Where did they come from? Emo Chenga took a look. They came from the Chengquan bag Zhong Muling gave her. Talismans made by deification cultivators, even if they deliberately lowered their realm requirements, still weren't simple goods. Is it inconvenient to say? No, Emo Chenga said, they were given to me by martial uncle Shoujing. Luo Fengxue, who was looking through the talismans, was startled. She raised her head and stared at Emo Chenga blankly. Emo Chenga's expression was the same as usual, but there was a hint of obscurity in her gaze. Chapter 121. Emo Chenga stood on top of the mountain peak, staring at the dense forest below the cliff with a slight frown on her face. Things were a little troublesome. When they came that day, the Yu clan said that there was a group of demonic beasts in the vicinity and that they had fought with them a few days ago. At that time, the demonic beasts had almost destroyed the Yu clan's defensive formation, and it was estimated that they would return in a few days. From then on, she and Luo Fengxue stayed in Yu clan to prepare for the upcoming battle. As for Han Qingyu and Wei Jiaxi, their two senior martial sisters, they kept in touch with Yu clan to investigate the demonic beast situation. The movements of these monster beasts were exactly as the Yu clan had said. They seemed to be monitoring them, but they also seemed to be neither close nor distant. Sometimes it seemed as if they were about to attack, and sometimes it seemed as if they were about to retreat. There were too many mortals and low-level cultivators in Yu clan. Han Qingyu thought it would be better if they didn't take the initiative to attack. Otherwise, the ones who attacked would have to fight alone, and the ones who stayed behind wouldn't have enough strength and would fall into the enemy's scheme. Wei Jiaxi actually didn't think a low-ranked demonic beast could have such intelligence, but Han Qingyu said it was better to be safe than sorry. They had come to battle to protect the Yu family. It would be better if they could kill the demonic beasts, but the safety of the Yu family was more important. However, in the following days, these demonic beasts did not attack again. Emo Chenga had already modified Yu clan's defensive formation, so she didn't think demonic beasts would be able to enter. However, the problem now was that demonic beasts were eyeing them covetously from the side and they couldn't solve the problem. This feeling was too unbearable. Moreover, they were ordered to assist, so how could they be delayed here? Today was her turn to patrol. Now that she was standing on the mountain peak, she discovered the aura of demonic beasts. The aura wasn't very strong, but it was very dense and it was extremely close. She hesitated for a moment before taking out the summoning talisman and saying a few words. With a wave of her hand, the summoning talisman flew towards the Yu family's courtyard. Before long, a flight light rose from the Yu clan. Wei Jiaxi rode her flying sword and approached them. She asked faintly, "What's the matter?" Wei Jiaxi's attitude towards her couldn't be considered good, but Mo Chenga was already used to it. Mo Chenga also didn't think it was necessary for her to improve her relationship with Wei Jiaxi, so she said faintly, "Senior Marshal Sister Wei, look over there." It appeared again. Wei Jiaxi turned around and stared for a while before she closed her eyes and released her divine sense. After a long time, she opened her eyes with a solemn expression. "Senior Sister Wei, what should we do?" According to Mo Chenga's divine sense, there were at least 5 or 6 second-ranked demonic beasts in that area. Wei Jiaxi wrinkled her brows and said, "Let's go take a look." Before she could get down from the flying sword, she immediately transformed into a flight light and flew towards the area filled with monster aura. Upon seeing this, Mo Chenga helplessly shook her head. She summoned a white silk handkerchief, then stepped onto it and followed closely behind Mo Chenga. He descended the mountain and flew into the forest. This white silk handkerchief was a gift from Zhong Muling. It was both a defensive magic weapon and a flying magic weapon. She still hadn't tested its defense function, but its flying ability was outstanding. It didn't require much spiritual aura, and it was fast and stable. With her experience, if she tried to escape, perhaps only a few foundation-building cultivators would be able to catch up to her. Besides, it's been some time since she built her foundation. Especially after the battle, she'd already taken some time to refine all those magic weapons and magic tools. Among them was the land-fleeing ruler. Even Zhong Muling praised it for its ingenuity. Even if she ran into something, she wouldn't be in any danger as long as she traveled 1,000 miles. However, Wei Jiaxi's expression was very unsightly at the moment. Her flying magic tool was just a flying sword. Although it was given to her by her master and was much better than ordinary flying swords, there was nothing special about it. After entering the forest, due to the terrain and environment, her flying speed was greatly reduced. Nevertheless, Mo Chenga was steady and extremely agile from beginning to end. She had been in the foundation-building realm for more than 80 years. Although she was still in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm, her understanding of spiritual aura cultivation techniques wasn't something ordinary cultivators could compare to. Now she was actually outclassed by Mo Chenga. Although it was because of magic tools, she still felt bad. Once they entered the jungle, it was already the territory of the demonic beasts. In the past there were only rank 1 demonic beasts, but now there would occasionally be rank 2 and 3 demonic beasts appearing. But along the way they didn't even see a single low-level demonic beast. "Hey, Senior Marshal Sister Wei." Mo Chenga suddenly stopped and called out. At this moment Wei Jiaxi was a little angry. She shouted angrily, "What are you doing?" "The demonic aura has disappeared." Wei Jiaxi was stunned. He hurriedly sent out his divine sense, and sure enough that was the case. Because Mo Chenga was the one who reminded her about this kind of thing because of her desire to compare herself with Mo Chenga, she felt even more humiliated and annoyed. "Even if it's gone, we should go to that place and see what's going on." Mo Chenga shook her head inwardly when she heard Wei Jiaxi's harsh words. She then followed behind Wei Jiaxi and continued to walk towards their original destination. She already learned from Luo Fengxue why Wei Jiaxi hated her, but she didn't think she was wrong. In fact, when she thought about it carefully, she was actually quite disappointed in Wei Jiaxi. Senior Marshal Sister Wei was so entangled in her emotions, yet she couldn't tell the reason. Even if Luo Fengxue managed to persuade her, it would most likely be very difficult for her to have any achievements in the future. This was the flaw in her character. After letting his imagination run wild for a while, the two arrived at their destination. As she slowly followed behind Wei Jiaxi, Mo Chenga secretly took out the shuttle of flying Apsara and got off the white silk handkerchief. She held it in her hand and lightly stepped on the withered branches to move forward. Suddenly she took a wrong step, her body floated up slightly and rolled to the side. At the same time Wei Jiaxi turned around and leaped high into the air. A bolt of lightning exploded where they were. Mo Chenga and Wei Jiaxi glanced at each other and saw the astonishment in each other's eyes. Someone who could hide their breath and had such a powerful spell that they couldn't find the location of the person who cast the spell? This opponent wasn't simple. She didn't seem like an ordinary second or third-ranked demonic beast. The two of them cautiously stood behind each other and took out their magic tools. Chinga's white silk handkerchief and shuttle of flying apsara. One for defense and the other for offense. Wei Jiasi took out several talismans and a small silver ring. Her water spirit flag was already destroyed, but she was still Master Daoist Xuanin's advanced inner disciple, so how could she be shabby? This Rui ring was also a powerful magic tool. The two of them used their divine senses to observe their surroundings. After an unknown amount of time, they suddenly made their moves at the same time. Wei Jiasi threw the Rui ring, which collided with a bolt of lightning. As for Chinga, she threw the white silk handkerchief. The handkerchief immediately changed shape in midair, turning into bricks and stones which fell down with a plop, plop, plop sound. They formed a wall in front of her, blocking the lightning. The difference was that while Wei Jiasi was forced back a step, Chinga didn't budge an inch. Wei Jiasi cast another glance at Chinga. Her eyes were filled with astonishment. She could naturally see that Chinga had both magic tools and magic weapons. Magic tools were fine since magic weapons were naturally better than hers, but she didn't expect them to be this powerful. Based on her estimation, that bolt of lightning just now was much more powerful than a foundation-building spell. Therefore, although she was strong, she was still forced back a step. Chinga, on the other hand, was unexpectedly so relaxed. A few days ago, Chinga, who had just entered the early stage of the foundation-building realm, returned after disappearing for several days. But now, she, who had just entered the early stage of the foundation-building realm, suddenly advanced to the middle stage of the foundation-building realm. This naturally aroused the suspicions of her acquaintances. However, their masters also explicitly ordered them not to inquire about this matter, so no one asked too much. Nevertheless, everyone knew that Chinga must have encountered some kind of fated chance. This matter urged Wei Jiasi to cultivate even more diligently. However, although she had a deep understanding of fights of magical powers, she didn't expect that not only did Chinga's cultivation level advance, but she was also stronger than her in fights of magical powers. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.